And hey, good to see you.
Oh, Brother Chris, how are you, mate?
Good. Cheers.
Cheers.
I just realized it's probably been actually a couple of years since we had a chat. So last time we had a sort of flurry of conversations, it was pre-pandemic. And we were thinking about going to Ayers Rock and doing something around, what was real wealth, wasn't it? So real wealth financially, but also emotionally, and in terms of chi energy, in terms of spirit. Interesting. We both we wanted it, and I could feel I wanted it, but it was like it wasn't landing because that would have been May, in the middle of lockdowns and all sorts of things. So interesting. Anyway, good to see you again. Thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, you too. I always find we come together at little significant moments, and there's like you know what I mean? Like they're like memorable, and there's a transmission of something anyway moving through our bodies and beings, and yeah. So it's been amazing, man. It was interesting because like it was a memory. I forget when it was 6 years ago. When we first met, there's a photo of us on the beach that's just shared yesterday or something like that, in Byron Bay. So that was like it's funny. I'm just connecting the dots now of the timing.
Interesting. Yeah. Oh, I
Yeah.
remember that. You were teaching us Qigong. We're in a circle on the beach. That was a great space to do Qigong in. Wow.
Yeah, it was cool, man. It's just great to share it with bodies that are alive and attuned and have done, you know what I mean, done work across since we kind of like wanted to chat more. So like integrally, I guess it's like from that embodiment perspective, have done lots of different flavors of different things, and it's kind of nice to feel people in a space that have done, like bits of different pieces and then bringing it together in their own way, and then doing Qigong together. Particularly those hybrid sets that we do, it's just ecstatic to feel everyone's essence and transmission coming on, like that was exciting. So I think I created these potent sets of people that had never done it so they could feel it. And then when you've got people who've done work and then they do it, it's like, it's amazing. So good memories, good times.
Yeah, it was good fun. Yeah, integral. That was another thing from our original connection, was talking about Ken Wilber and integral theory, and that was part of what your impetus to reach out this time was, wasn't it? You've come up with your own theory, your own model, and I got a multi-message download and a picture the other night, and in about 10 minutes, I got a really good feel for what you're doing and how you're connecting, I guess, what's traditionally called the lower realm, the upper realm, and the earth realm, what's above and below and on here and now. Do you want to tell us more about that, or how it's come about, or?
Yeah. Cool. Shall we? Yeah, I guess so. Like, all right. I'll do a little. If I could be host, I'll do a little screen share, and I'll bring up. I'll bring up this.
Make host.
Okay, so let's see how this works. Cool. Well, fun place to start. And okay, great. So I first came across this map in the Transcending teachings, and kind of like what was fresh that I was like, we were just really, I guess the best way to describe it is to give it a little bit of a breakdown. So you've got, they call it the ninefold manifestation of man. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Because you've got the 7 planes, but 2 of them link over each other. So you've got the personality, the soul, and the monad. And so the personality is largely where the world is at the moment, and we're kind of like in the mental plane, and we're having a crisis, which is basically when the soul, when someone goes through a mental crisis, it's usually impression of soul coming through. So personal development can like build us up to the top, or the crown chakra of the personality, if you will, the mental plane. But then from then, it's really the integration of soul embodiment, and it's a different language, different tools, different, different way to approach it. And it's not better or worse. It's just like driving in a car. You know, you get to third gear, you're revving out, and if you know you just burn out if you keep going on. If it's time to shift gears, you've got to like shift gears. So I'm just trying to think of a way to describe this. One of the ways that I like to describe it is when we have those moments of lightning, like on the monadic plane, there's a cracking of lightning, and it happens as it's like pure destructive force, and not destructive force. It's just like lightning, not necessarily bad, but what it does is it realigns the atmic, buddhic, mental, astral, and physical plane for a person. So it's like this, and it comes on as a strong, usually like an impression of no, like I know, like you feel such a vibration alive inside of us. It's a current that's landed, and it's like we can feel our values and everything just coming on beyond the mind, and it's like the body is vibrating, and we can no longer stand for what we were before. And so usually it's a no. So in Taoist culture, we say like yin gives birth to yang. And so when it strikes on the monadic plane, it's striking from the logoic, which is pure being, which is basically where our soul banks its memories over lifetimes. Mm-hmm. So on the logoic plane, it doesn't really matter what we do in this lifetime. It's that pure presence that just is. And however, the more we incarnate soul and we work through our personality gifts, etc., it does kind of gets transmitted into this. So when we're born with so much monadic energy in our being naturally. And then of course, when you have a map, you have a way, you have a path, you can actually start to work with it, and you can evoke, through the soul, you can bring through many lifetimes and live them more deeply as one and get to the core of that essence at the heart of the soul. So what happens at the monadic plane is a destructive purpose. Then on the atmic plane, what happens is purification. So usually when people get that lightning, so the atmic plane is what the Taoists would call the divine plan, the Taoists would call like Wu Wei. You're living in heaven's will. You're living in alignment of the energy that's outpouring from the core of the heart, and it's a revelation and a revealing of destiny, people, life events. It's a fascinating unfolding, and we've all had that experience to some degree or another, and the Taoists really purely live by that. So on the atmic plane, there's a purification. So when people feel that lightning and they feel that stand, usually what happens is some form of
purification, like they become a vegan, or they sign up for yoga, or they do qigong, or they do some breath work, or it's going to be different for other people. Some people just clean up their whole life on the physical plane. It's like, fuck, I'm moving house, I'm changing relationship, there's some sort of purification that happens. What's good to know about this is we can then manage that transmission of energy more gracefully, and because we're still managing our ego, and depending on how much personal development we've done on the lower levels, like physical, astral, and mental, it makes the revelation of our higher plan, or the higher unfolding of the Tao, if you will, much more smoother to integrate than like crazy polarity and like trying to find our tribe and throwing out people we don't like, and just because we're having this transmission of strong energy. So and so basically there's a lot of, and it's not that like there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying, like, from a Taoist perspective, if you cultivate the yin and the nourishment of the root, then the journey of lightning is much more smoother to embody and then transmit. And it's actually a lot more stable, because kind of like what we're seeing now, if you look at Ken Wilber's model of like, we'll chat about that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, of like wake up, grow up, clean up, show up. And then he's got like the last one, open up. And is that there's a lot of triggering around the woke culture, but it's like most rationally minded people. I mean, it was one thing I love about you is you're very integrated on the rational plane, which I love, and yet you're very embodied and you've done all the deep work. So it's a real gift to chat to you. Is that there's a lot of triggering around people who are like woke, but that most people don't realize that there's those other stages of development to then grow up, get some elevation, which we'll chat about, and then cleaning up their system, and then being able to show up in a more clean way. So, but we have to, knowing the territory, we have space and compassion for things we necessarily don't understand become clean, because it's like, oh, I can see where this fits. And now there's a language and a conversation, and it's not as terrifying as I thought it was, because I can place it in the realm of, awakening.
So yeah, so it's a purification that happens. And basically what happens is that lightning is demanding the atmic, the soul, which is the Buddhic, the mental, and the astral and the physical to come into pure alignment. So a real master is someone who's got pure alignment with the monadic straight down to the physical. That takes like a lot of like work, not just personal development, soul identification, soul embodiment, soul incarnation work, learning to trust the mystery of life. Usually there's a whole process of stuff there. Some of it, when you unpack it, some people might be just like, nah, too intense, you know what I mean? But, you know, there's states and stages to the journey, and people can go at whatever pace that they want to. And interesting with the lightning, sometimes we don't have a choice. Like, you know, if you've got a lot of monadic energy banked up, or the circumstances came together for that perfect storm, it's like, in a way, you have been chosen by God or by the higher plan or by your own divine intervention that it's time to awaken. And so having a map and a model really, really helps. So basically, what I've done to help my journey more deeply in and through this, like obviously I have the Embodied I Ching, which is like a 9-week process that helps people ground more deeply. But what I've done in this map in terms of giving value just here today is each of the planes, physical, astral, mental, Buddhic, atmic, monadic, and logoic, I've broken them down into 2. So as an example, one common one that we're struggling with in the world, or even a lot of rational people can struggle with, is on the bottom of the mental plane is the concrete mind, where we want data, we want facts, we want clarity, but then above it's the higher vibration of an enlightened Shen expansive mind. And sometimes, depending on a person's development, the ego doesn't have room for that, can't accept that, doesn't want to let it in. So then it's like, and then therefore, what we have to understand is there is 14 dimensions of intelligence within these 7 planes that are equally valid and equally important. And the reason why we value mental so much is because society was so driven by astrology and tracking the moons and where the star systems were at. It was such a deep part of all cultures, you know, everywhere. And then astrology broke away from, or science broke away from astrology, which is really obviously a good move. But the downside to that is we lost connection and we valued the mind over cosmos, over earth, over the natural phenomena. And we started to kind of like get so in the concrete of mind, we let go of the life. So it's like the written word became more important than the vibration of the current of what's emerging and the information that's moving through that. And so a lot of people are therefore like fragmented and disconnected. So this is why an integral perspective allows a lot more harmony and integration of different, and actually, quite frankly, like a better conversation, because we're looking at where do we align, where do we meet, what's missing in this conversation, how can we facilitate like a more holistic, expansive, supportive conversation with pure respect and understanding of where we're at, even if we're not fully clear of it. You know, that's why like on this conversation, I can't wait to ask you questions, and because, you know what I mean, like, and from your perspective, because that's especially from a soul perspective, like personality is very individual driven, whereas a soul is more humanitarian focused. It really has love and freedom at the core. And I think that's why a lot of governments are struggling to manage this transition of going in from Piscean age to Aquarian age, is that we're moving into, rather than there being a hierarchy of people we get our information from, like Buddha or Christ or the Pope or certain, like, to actually groups of people coming alive with that vibration of soul embodiment, with the deep wisdom of like Buddha or Christ kind of like within. But then the mystery is found within group and listening to the empty center and what is emerging through a body of groups. And so that's a whole nother field. So getting back onto point, so the physical realm, I like to call the lower aspect of the physical. I haven't marked it here, but that's the underworld. And anyone who's gone on a shamanic journey, or even like for me, it landed in really deeply with Haydn, and then also a level 2 in Hista that I did. But any type of shamanic activation is really this awakening, like, holy fuck, there's another world that's not in like from the heart chakra up, where I'm trying to manage the current view of life and what society and everyone's working out. There's a deeper realm that's more linked to the earth, more linked to the frequencies and the vibration right down to the core, and the different kingdoms, from like the animal kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, the plant kingdom, and then just the life and all the different mysteries and magic that, you know, that's a whole conversation in itself. And then you've got obviously the development then of the upper side, which is more of our physical reality, how probably like the everyday person kind of experiences that usually unfortunately disconnected from those deeper shamanic roots. However, if we establish the connection to the root, we have a much more earth-centric way of living, which is better for humanity. And then that's the root. The value of the upper levels is always going to be determined by the connection of the root, if you look at Chinese medicine. So this is like a core thing about people ascending up and forgetting that without, like they have a saying in China, Mei Ji Chu, Mei Gong Fu, which means like without a good root, you don't even have the skill. You don't have you can't really ascend. So most of the time wasted up there, not wasted up there, without a proper rooting system, it's not nourished, it's not fully landed. And so that's kind of like the big note that I really want to stand for in the world, is really develop the root, really develop the foundation at each of these levels. And interesting, the big round circle is actually,
Just throw a frame of reference on that one, because you've mentioned integral, and what we're talking about here is both, you know, different philosophers and different philosophical and civilizational systems. And the one we're referencing in particular by integral is Ken Wilber's R-Qual integral theory. And, you know, he's a Western philosopher, and he's got a couple of really key little breakthrough observations around putting models like this together. And I can hear you speaking to it so beautifully, so from that embodied, lived point of view. And that's that as you move through levels or dimensions of growth, or if you wake up through different planes of existence, and you start to integrate who you are, what you are, and your interaction with those level dimensions, you can become disassociated from previous levels where you were functional. And so you want to be able to transcend and include, and that's that, you know, maintaining the root, so you're including what's essential, so the whole plant can grow, and we're just like plants in that sense, you know. And without the foundation, without the roots, without a good trunk, you're not going to have a good set of branches, you're not going to have good leaves and make good offerings and produce great fruit. You know, even though the fruit might seem like, or the flower might seem like the most amazing thing, and so we can chase for it. If we chase for that with losing our roots, we just fall over. So
you know,
transcend and include.
Transcend and include, such an essential takeaway and like a note, because it's usually when we're without a map or an understanding, it's usually what happens is we throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? And then we start judging that level, because we've awoken to the new level, and we're like, this is it. And we want to tell everyone that, like, like this is it. And we're like, oh, I've done that. And we just sort of like forget, like we want to, exactly what you said, like transcend and include. It's such a, but by the way, that's why in Chinese culture, there's in Qigong and that, there's a foundation of standing, like as the very first fundamental thing, because you want, before you go up and ascend, and paradoxically, the more stronger your root is, the more you can reach the heavens. This is what some people forget to, you know what I mean? Like they're like, right, I'm going up there, and it's like, and then it can get a lot diluted. It's not as it doesn't vibrate as deeply with the earth and their own physical reality as what it can when we work with that. Yeah, so that's like a key aspect. And it's interesting with embodiment, you know, depending on which school you go to, that there's almost like there needs to be an integral lens within, mapped out. You know, from my Qigong perspective, I can go to groups and I'm like, not that embodied, and perhaps they're feeling the same way about me through their lens of embodiment, right? So that's just an interesting little side note. So yeah, and then on the astral plane, which is like basically, it's really where the emotional body gets cracked open, and particularly for men, it's a bit of a journey, because it's like it's not Australian culture or Western culture, for whatever reason, it hasn't been supported to really honor and connect with that with the emotional body and to work through it. So the lower aspect is kind of like when we are doing deeper, like shadow work, and we're unpacking stuff. And what tends to happen when the lightning comes on, by the way, you'll feel people are like they're alive with this message, but the key indication that there's work to do in the astral plane is there's levels of fear coming through the message. So that's like a good awareness for tracking. It's like that way you can like take what is useful, not take on like the fear aspects, because if we haven't worked through that emotional realm, there's a lot of like fear, or also on the astral plane, there's a lot of leftover transmissions of different teachers and masters in the field. So sometimes it's not a clean current of them channeling. They're channeling from the astral field, not from like the Buddhic or the Atmic or the Monadic. It's like leftover juju or vibrations from the field or everyone else's emotional body. And so that cleanup phase there is like super, super important. So the lower half, I basically link it as that, but also the responsibility to clean up and do any type of shadow work. And obviously we met through Spiral, and it's a big process of unpacking emotions and that in that sense. And the upper part is where we have a vibrational resonance and harmony with, like, to keep it simple, the authentic law of attraction teachings. Like, can we vibrate deeply with the resonance of who we be and the life as if it is now? And so it's almost, it's like that is what brings on a lot of our higher frequency or vibration in terms of manifestation and attraction. So it's funny because in those astral planes, you see some people just stick with shadow work and just see the light side as like, too fluffy or nah. And then you see people on the light side that are just, in denial, that don't want to go down and do any of those developments. So, and for me personally, it was like just dedicating a fair bit of, like, about at least 3 or 4 years to just in that emotional plane. And it's not like you ever necessarily like fully graduated, because you know what I mean, there's like states and stages, but yeah, I just found that was an interesting way to look at it, so people can like have both. They can vibrate with the essence of now and be aware of the undercurrent of shadow, and particularly, like, sometimes a lot of mental people completely are just disconnected from the astral and whatsoever. Like, they just don't see the value in it, don't see the intelligence of it. And so as a result, you'll have people that will look at data, but they're not able to look at other elements of what brought that data down, and to, as an example, there was time where Coca-Cola and, they had like scientific evidence of why it's good for your health, but when you're linked in with your clean emotional connection and it's rooted, you can see straight through that, even though the data might be positioned in a way to convince the concrete mind that this is right. And so, of course, the ego really sitting on the mental plane, although it's not just, it's there, that's just generally where it kind of, its reference point is. What can happen with rational people is what the data is, it's just like a new type of religion, rather than it being like a blind faith. It's like, I cannot be convinced outside of the data, and I'm not saying all, but it's just an interesting thing that I've witnessed when it comes to more integral levels of dimension and us like kind of working together, because I really see the value that they provide in the world. However, if it's not linked up to the other realms, the mind, particularly where we're at developmentally, has such a dominant force over the body, over the emotions, over the soul, over, and basically, if we're not linked to our emotions, sometimes we can't even see that there's greed, or that there's unhealthy ambition, or different things that are moving through, because like we're just in the data aspect of it, not looking at what is the general motives and where are we in balance or out of balance with the way that we are approaching this. And so because they identify with that mind, the mind is so susceptible to influence and manipulation when it doesn't have a strong root. Because it has no grounding. So its root is actually concrete information, which is great, but without its strong root, it can be easily swayed money, by influence, by survival needs, by self-importance of that identification. Like, oh, I just need to keep my job. I just need to. So these are some of the shadow issues with just someone who's in the concrete mind and without the connection to the root.
Yeah, beautiful. Do you want to unshare the image just out of curiosity?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. I might do this so we can.
Just for the others, each of those levels has a top and a below. I didn't go into it, but that might give a bit of a grounding at least before. You know what I mean? I didn't go into like the soul or
heaps of detail that you can go into. So what stands out for me as you present your model is a number of things. One, that transcend and include aspect, right? That as you actually grow through any of the levels of development, that you actually, we have this tendency to discard what was and to, hold on for dear life onto the new. And it needs to be a balance of both. And that's my second point I'm noticing is that whatever we get good at, whatever we get a competence in, in any body or any realm in any dimension, we can get fundamentalist about it. We can be like, that's the thing, and it's the only thing. Right? So as soon as we find that we're cutting most other things out or becoming fundamentalist on one thing, for me, they're the two big warning signs that I've always taken to heart. I'm like, oh, I'm getting absolutely definite. And I remember my friend and our mutual friend, Ben Marin, we're going back 25 years ago, we used to live together, and I'd go, and that's the way it is, and he'd be like, unless it isn't. And we had this ongoing, joke every time we'd have a conversation, and we'd get to one of those points, and that's how it is. We're trying to figure things out, unless it isn't. And it's just that upending of that fundamentalist tendency, that innocent drive that we all as humans have to want to have certainty in this incredibly chaotic and uncertain existence, and so we can lovingly hold it, but knowing that, wow, that's when we become brittle, or we're out on the edge of a branch, if you will, is when we become fundamentalist about anything. That's one of the things. So we've got to transcend includes, we don't cut out too many things and not become too fundamentalist. That doesn't mean we're not passionate. It doesn't mean that we don't get fierce. It doesn't mean we don't intervene and take action and stand up for things. We're not throwing out the baby of our agency and our ability to express care and concern in our community with the bathwater of being fundamentalist mentally, emotionally, physically, in any dimension, right? So there's a tricky little plays to watch for there. So those two things stand out. What was the other one? I guess in the other one about your map, and like on a lot of these maps, and whether it's the Kashmir Shaivism 32 tattvas, or it's the Buddhist sort of Buddhic feel I got going on, refuge tree, I've got a lineage behind me here, talking about astral energy imprints, and whether it's their Faith sheaves, the different bodies, or whether it's Ken Wilber's map or your map, and you've broken down 7 levels, and actually it's 14, and actually there's an upper and lower in each, and it gets more and more complex and detailed as we sort of zoom in with the microscope, which can be really useful. But there's 2 key things that stand out. One is a lot of these maps have sort of a static, sort of top-down, like a roadmap view of reality. It's like, there are these many dimensions that are worth looking at. And then they talk about the development through it, and that's the lived experience. And that's not top down, that's inside out, that's a process, that's organic, it's messy, it's, it's human, but it's where we relate to it from, and so we can easily get caught up, especially if we're mental types, looking at the map and going, because I can talk about monadic or soul level, it means I am and operating from that level consciously. And that's not necessarily the case either. And this is the sort of flip to transcend and include, is sort of getting situated with where am I actually operating from, and to what degree of competence and health developmentally am I actually up to, so that I'm then can choose my next steps healthily, rather than thinking I'm already enlightened and I can fly, and jumping off a building and dying for my delusion. It's an extreme example, but it kind of hopefully makes.
I think it's great, because I think especially when people have like strong energetic practices, they go through such a massive awakening. And you know, this really leads into the grow up phase, right? Because you just wake up and then like exactly what you said is more of that graceful. For me, it felt like graceful, more of the feminine quality of the innocence and the experience versus the masculine. I'm gonna, you know, which can get obviously when it gets to that yang point, it becomes very frail and brittle. But yeah, so I love that because I see I've seen that in myself many times over. You know, you like the excitement, you're like, and then like, you know, life will humble us, and it's beautiful to be humble, and it will humble us, especially if we, you know, we go like a hose that just hasn't, you know what I mean? It's like, and you know, so eventually it'll stable, and yeah, I just think like that's such a useful part of what you explained. And one of the ways that I like to say it is it's like the, you know, this is my definition of the occult mind. Like a map or any word is just like is dead, but it's like it's fixed. It's but like it's the aliveness behind it. Like it's the relevance of how it's vibrating now when you look into it and feel into it. And it's only ever meant to be like a guide and at best, you know, and like that, you know, that's basically it. And I think
Let me
from
jump
like
in there. One of my
yeah,
friends, Josh Floyd, has this great line that, you know, any map to be useful has to be wrong. And so
yeah,
it's about knowing how your map's wrong, where the limits of the map are. And we can get very caught up, particularly living through strong minds or having incredibly great maps or lots of data and detail. It's like, oh, I want the map to include everything. Well, then we're going to try and include all of reality, and you've just gone past the point of having the map. The map is to have a, you know, one-page cheat sheet to get orientated with and to facilitate, you know, a conversation so we know we're roughly talking about the same thing. So yeah, I really appreciate the getting to the aliveness. You know, the map's only got this little bit of utility, incredible, very useful. You want one. You know, if you're stuck somewhere, you want a map, but you've got to know that it is wrong, and to be useful, it's got to be very wrong, right? And so knowing those limits, and so it's knowing that the benefit and the limitation of anything, I think, is also just a really useful way of living or a principle to live by, particularly when it comes to
yeah.
maps.
And I think like the big thing that like I like to teach people too is it's like the law of resonance. And through maps or any teaching, like we're only going to receive the information based on our root, gut, heart, mind connection. And most people like are sort of like fragmented. So rational types, you just receive it intellectually, almost like stuck. Like how does this even, what is he even talking about? You know what I mean? More heart types will be like, oh wow, like I'm feeling an organization of wisdom, or I'm feeling the quality of love behind it, or you know what I mean? And that's becoming an informative agent, like kind of beyond kind of logic. Or gut people go, oh yeah, I feel that, you know, like it's landing. And then rooted people will be looking at like, oh, how can I land this or anchor it, or where is it, where does it have physical purpose sometimes? And basically with how the law of resonance works is it's like we only perceive the information based on our root, you know, gut, heart, and mind connection. And so that's a big teaching fundamentally. It's like establish your root and work on how to get the coherency between these centers. Otherwise, you'll only perceive it through the lens that you're at. And so you'll, you know what I mean? Like that will make the whole journey so much more graceful and easy, because sometimes the head can't work it out. Sometimes the heart needs some reference from the mind, you know. Sometimes we've got to trust our gut. And it's like, hang on a minute, like this might be great, but is it for me? Like, is this my path? Is this my journey? You know, what is the right path? And it's like gut saying it's this way. And then it's like, okay, cool. That informs the heart and the head. And then collectively, how all of those aspects come together is often like the fullness of where we're resonating with our own destiny, which then by law, we just draw in more of the resonance that we're being, the people, the soul connections, the events, you know, because we're like a lighthouse for what we be in the world. I just think that's a really important aspect.
especially when we're getting into those maps and some of the heady kind of theory. And I guess that's also somewhat my, not anymore, but it used to be my initial pushback with like Ken Wilber's teaching, because like coming from a deep Taoist perspective, it's a universal truth. Like it's just fully alive, and it, you know, can never be mapped. Truth is perpetual, it's always changing. As soon as you say it's something, it no longer is. The Tao that is the Tao cannot be spoken. It's, you know, so it's like, and it was like, and I found, although I don't have the eloquency to like maybe express it, but perhaps it can be felt by those in resonance. I just found that some of the original, he's like, as he used to talk about Buddhist Taoists and not having these frameworks, but I think when you get into some of the deeper traditions, you'll be surprised at the levels of mapping and development that some of these other traditions have, which I felt like maybe from, because even when I look at religious, some of the people have gone through, you know, university, have like religious degrees, some of it's really dry and bland, like that. And like, oh, they, you know, as an example, there's a common note that, or this feeling that the West has this idea of soul and then the East doesn't, you know, it's more non-dual or whatever. But in my studies of Chinese esoterics, it's like Bo is the aspect of the animal soul. So they have an animal soul and also the human soul. And so it's in linking those two up that we have more of a full, like our gut becomes more of our instinctive, you know, intuitive intelligence from the lower sort of shamanic realms, and our heart is more of the divine sort of aspects. And they also, there's no of this, there's none of that, there's less of that good versus evil type of a paradigm sort of going on, because it's like there's actually arts like the Earth Demon Gate and different things like that, which would sound to a Christian lens very like, oh my God, stay away from that. But actually the quality of embodiment and earth and connection and love that is found and healing, and actually more of those divine qualities that can come through developing those lower aspects is so good. So I went on a bit of a sort of a tangent there, but
oh, it's brilliant.
yeah,
this is what we're here for, is just crawling around the stuff, sharing the richness. You know, and something worth saying is that we're neither you or I are really scholars. We're more the practitioner. We're more the healer, the doer, the relator, helping other people kind of get the transmission or to get unstuck where they might be, you know, finding that something's causing them trouble or pain in life, and to help them, you know, come into that alignment, that coherency between the different centers, the different levels and dimensions of their own being, you know, and also helping handle when you've had that sort of what you're describing, the monadic sort of lightning bolt, boom, it's like it wakes up in the system and causes a reorganization or a repolarization. You know, it's like, how do people handle that? Some people don't handle it very well. They aren't resourced, they haven't got frameworks, they haven't got community support or other nervous systems to model how you can hold that juice coming through and hold the transformation with relative ease and grace, rather than you know, a messy sort of explosion all over the place. So that's more, I think, what I see both you and I doing is that practitioner sense, right? Things like that. And so, you know, I'm not at all the scholar, but I've read a lot of the scholarship and it's informed my practice. And, you know, I think everyone who's got the model, they're going to be wrong. You know, actually one of the things I appreciate about Ken, when he wrote the beginning of every book, he basically in the introduction went, by the way, this is all a lie. But it's the best one I can tell to be useful, and so it's an offering, you know. And so as we receive these things secondhand, it can sound like it's dogmatic, it's this, it's that, and this is the absolute way it is, and it's like, well, whoa, we've just got to hold it all a bit more lightly. Where was I going to go with that?
In the transmission from, I think you'll have some good pieces on this. It's like, you know, like someone might hear what we say and then they say it, but not from the transmission of the embodiment that we've gone through, right? So then it might be perceived as intellectual wisdom. So someone will be like, check that person out, but they hear it from that person, it might be like, oh, you know, it's like how, like that life, that transmission that's behind what we do. And some of it, it's not just in the theatrics, you know, like some of it's not just in the, like, how well am I, you know, dancing and doing the thing and whatever, like in the Tao, it's like,
can you feel the emptiness? And can you feel the subtle qualities of self-organization that are happening in the softness that's unfolding, to recognize that there's actually something possible? Like in Chinese culture, it's there's a particularly in I don't want to say Chinese, in Taoist, it's like every meeting is, it's like the walkabout in indigenous culture. Like if you meet on the walk, it's like boom. It's not like this 3D thing that we've decided to meet in time, which funny enough, that's what we've decided to do today. And in that realm, that's perfect as well. And it's all, you know, and life is moving through it all. However, it's like on those upper realms, it's like walkabout or the Taoist Wu way. It's like when you bump into someone, it's without the mind, without the maps, trusting the life of what's unfolding and what is being revealed, and being present to it. If there's nowhere to get to, if there's nowhere to go, if there's no time to tell us that we need to meet anywhere, and if everyone else is trusting that everything's in that divine timing, we can just allow what needs to unfold. And that is a beautiful existence to be in. And that is like, and of course, this is where I've mentored a lot of high performing entrepreneurs, or a lot of different people, different levels. This is where a lot of integrity breakdown can happen on the lower personality level, because it's like, hey, you said this or that. And so funny enough, this is how I used to manage it. Now it's a lot more graceful, but I used to say, can we pencil in this time? And I would just let them know that, like, I'd give them a little talk about like walkabout or spirit culture or whatever. Like, and basically if someone is not there, it's like it's the trust of they're exactly where they need to be. And that's it. So where's such and such? They're exactly where they need to be. This is Australian indigenous sort of culture. It's exactly where they need to be. And so there's not this like, but we were meant to meet here and you've got a lack of integrity. And and sure, there's times where that development of that personal self and our management of, you know, we've kind of agreed that we have a 24-hour day, and, you know, we have a 12 months of the year, and, you know, it's a map. They're useful maps that we kind of try to relate to. And but then if the map becomes territory, which is funny because I think in Western culture and modern life, it's almost become the dogmatic truth and be all and end all, where the ego and identification, it's that is who they are. It's like, well, what happened before those maps came out? Where did those maps even come from? Who was telling those stories? Why were they telling those stories? You know, and starting to unravel all those pieces and getting to like the innocence of just walkabout. Like one of the things, if you're unwell sometimes or you want to reconnect to you, just go for a walk. It's simple as that.
Absolutely. I've lived that experience year in, year out. Like get outside in the sunshine, put my head up, breathe, and just walk. And then life happens. I'm going to play with it, but to put a map of language to this talk about maps and non-maps. You know, the maps, times, calendars, dimensions, levels, realms, you know, all this kind of stuff. Again, it's that top down, you know, sort of very hyper yang or healthy yang sometimes hyper yang way of doing things. And then there's the yin, and we can get stuck in excessive yin too. So the maps are useful and can get us orientated. The joining of the two. And the simplest, I think, lived experience is the difference between I've just read a book or I've just heard a talk, even like this, and then I'm in the moment, in the next moment. I'm meeting somebody. Am I applying the map to them, or am I following the energy that's coming up? Am I following the way, you know? And the Kashmir Shaivite lineage says following the spanda. You know, where's the Shakti, the energy arising? Where's the aliveness? And where's the aliveness want to go? And in the broader view, then it's a life, or aliveness is what's happening. That's what you want to go with, rather than holding on to something and getting it kind of slightly dead. And yes, you've trapped it and you've got it labeled and you can show it around, but it becomes lifeless, it becomes the empty words. And something to loop back to something you mentioned before, and then anyone can parrot those words. They may not ever have had the aliveness, they may not ever have had the developmental coherency and integration and inner alignment to have resonance behind those words so they actually mean something, you know. But then here we're in the social media influencer age, and a little teenager can come along and go, oh, I can say the same words, I'll just talk in paradoxical riddles about the nature of the way, and they end up with a following. And you're like, Whoa,
Yeah.
it's empty of all substance, and some people prefer it like that. It's a nice, light, easier to digest than having to deal with someone like you with lots of chi who may or may not show up at the agreed time because something big is happening, you know?
Yeah. And it's funny. I love also showing up on time, and I love disciplining myself for that as well. And it's funny because I think it comes down to where understanding what we're working through. Like when I was in the state of complete mystery and in the underworlds, it was very much like, I had to learn that. I didn't explain it but that as well as I'd like to, but it was the delicacy that, and I think this is the whole integral thing, right? It's understanding where we're developing and where we're sitting at, and where are the other people that we're working with sitting at, and how do we find the language or the music or the note where both people can go, thank you. And I think that's what's good about maps. And then, like just, and then also bringing that embodied flavor on too. Like I never like to think like, oh, a person, like, when I go into a session, I think it can be a bit like it all downloads, and I'm like, I'm trying to self-diagnose to support, right? But like in life, it's like, and I've definitely done the other way too. Like you walk around it, and it's that young, immature sort of energy, and you want to prove something, and you want to, or there's an innocence, and you're just trying to get good at it too, perhaps. And but yeah, versus just allowing the being to happen, and then so I think it's interesting then, actually. I think because how would you encourage people to practice? It's like, I think finding modalities, like I created the Embodied I Ching, gone through the spiral. I know you've got some of your modalities as well. Like, and what this allows us to do is work with consent with people who are in resonance for what we've got, in ways to help them unfold this. And then they can actually get a direct transmission via the maps, but with the energetic quality that's happening through it, that can give them some relevancy and some resonance on those particular levels or layers, which is just like, because I'm just trying to think, it's all well and good for us to say this is how it is, but then how does someone even go about that?
Yeah, let's go further into
Being
this.
practitioners.
Yeah, let's go further into this. It's really interesting, and a couple things I want to hit on. But the first one is just a metaphor. It's that difference between, if you want to be a great jazz musician who in the moment can riff and respond in live with multiple people and an audience and an atmosphere, you've got to sit at home and do your scales for years. It's like you've got to know the rules, you've got to study the map, you've got to do the discipline to be able to then actually transcend having to stay in that. But that transcendence is informed by, again, so it's a transcending and including. You can't get to that free flow mastery without some really strong discipline first, So I think jazz musician is my constant sort of metaphor for it. And this working with other people then really brings I think this really useful framework, thanks Ken Wilber, around the wake up, grow up, clean up, show up, sort of open up, right? And Ken sort of came up with this as a simplified, that's kind of his thing. He wants to get it as simple as possible to give you as much access to as much complexity. But this was more, my understanding anyway, like the pragmatic, what are my priorities today? What am I going to do? No matter what religion or cultural background I come from, no matter what sort of practices I resonate with, no matter what stages of, where I'm up to, what's the broadest, simplest, who am I, where am I, what do I focus on kind of metric or mnemonic. So waking up, let's talk more about what that is, and then go through the things, because I think what we both do is help people wake up, grow up, clean up, show up, open up. It's one lens, a way to look at it, So you've mentioned a whole bunch of things around what waking up is, but let's unpack that a little bit more. Because I think, that's a huge field in itself. You can have, a whole university course.
Yeah, it is. It really is, because it's like even in Qigong, the amount of waking up from different systems that I've got, which is different to the other system, right? So it's like and all of them also, this is where the Taoist, I don't even want to say it's a map, but maybe a lens or a view of, like, there's the one life beyond it all, through it all. So waking up will have that similar quality. Because we could, as an example, I don't know, receive some, like, as an example, we go through in the grow up phase, for the Blue Dragon Qigong, we get them to budget with the metal element, and they track their data. And as a result of the data, they wake up to, oh shit, this is what I'm doing with it. So that's like a little form of waking up, probably a little bit more maybe analytical or more like, but again, you want to help people build the root on the foundation. So yeah, so
Well, it's interesting. But
right.
so the way I kind of relate to that, the language I have for it is any moment of insight or expansion or illumination. So lightning bolt coming down, an insight, something coming up, you know, or coming forward, or a shift in perspective. It's like, and so there's something new. So in some way, really simply, waking up is that you've found some new data, you've got some new insight, you've got a new inspiration, a new connection, a new something, and then you get degrees of just how much. You know, if you got a really big lightning bolt coming down that's from the core of your being and spirit and life, or is it something primal sort of really erupting through you, or is it just I really should get my finances in order because the tax man's coming, you know. Each can be equally valuable in day-to-day.
Right. Do it right till the right time.
So that you want to have the right kind of waking up. You know, well, you're going to value different sizes and types of waking up in different contexts, different situations. But that interesting thing that you were mentioning, then, that quality of that deeper spiritual aspect. So talking from the Taoist point of view, that it includes real waking up. Perhaps if I can include that real waking up, not just having an insight or getting better at your taxes. Includes some more connection to or awareness of the life that's through all of it, that both transcends and is in everything.
This is a good conversation because perhaps it's really so 2007 I went to Wudang Mountain and I trained with a Taoist scholar and Taoist alchemist from the Taoist immortal traditions, which is super rare, not mainstream at all, from lineages of beings that when you practice, hair regrows, teeth regrows, blood goes, but, you know, really, really out there, like really just even from spirituality, when you get into the mainstream of that, this is like not, it's very hard to like track and find. I think it's a resonance thing too, you know, like things appear when they appear. It's very strange that I'm just chatting about that too, you know, like I'm just like, okay. So one aspect, because I went through, it was 3 weeks of daily practice. There was dietary work, and basically there was a Taoist alchemy practice that we would do every day. And it was, that was my first experience of waking up, at least from a Taoist lens, and it stayed with me ever since. And it was like 9 months of pure enlightenment afterwards. And fucking, it was weird because like everything had changed and yet nothing had changed. And I was completely anchored in this place. And even the hardcore, I went back to live with Shaolin monks after that. And even the hardcore breaking down of body, it just stabilized with me, you know? And then eventually I think getting back into modern life after 9 months, you know, you start layering aspects on, and depending where, this is the importance of tools and processes too, because then where does the identification of our mind anchor to? You know, and where do we numb out, and where do we, and also our environment. Sometimes I can be super receptive to our environment. Like right now we're having this conversation, so things are expanding and the energy feels really good. And then I'm there, you know, like by all means, there's so much in all of our journey that we get to learn from each other too. So what happens with the Taoist one though, is it's all about prenatal awakening. So not to the one life that is here, to going into emptiness. And what's fascinating about emptiness is it's like, well, first of all, you realize that most illnesses or limitations are all psychological. They're a psychological manifestation. And before physical, before energetic, and before consciousness, there's this great emptiness. And I'm struggling in this moment to really give context to how it's different to the lightning, but it's like, although, okay, another way of explaining it's coming through, if you look at and this is kind of like crossing over more cosmological mystery school teachings with Taoism now, why not? We're here in the space and it's going through. So,
hey man, postmodernism has happened. We're here to synthesize, you know?
Yeah. So it's like, if you look at light, the speed of light, like getting to the next galaxy, right, is 30,000 light years away. Mm-hmm. So when people talk about, I'm going to different galaxies, and they're like all being of the light. Well, it ain't light. That's actually, if you're traveling to the other galaxy, because you just, didn't happen in 30,000 light years. So there's, well, where does light come from? And so there's this field of emptiness where all things emerge. So one of the Taoist cosmological frameworks I've been trained in is that everything comes from nothing. The first thing is yin, then yin gives birth to yang, then that basically gives birth to the humans, and that's this integration, then the 4 seasons, then the 5 elements, the 6 sounds, or the 6 directions, and that goes into a few other little 6 things. And then you've got, there's a recycling stage, and you've got the 8 elements, and which are the great 8 manifestations, and then it goes 64 trigrams, if you're hexagrams, and etc. And then 10,000 things. All things come from nothing.
Yeah. And all the things are here. And I'm reminded of one lineage I spent many decades in this lifetime, Kashmir Shaivism. The breaking down of all the tattvas sounds very similar to what you've just said, right? There's big differences. There's 32 levels from emptiness or the total oneness, and then it starts to manifest as principles and splits into yin yang, into Shiva Shakti or Prakasha Vimasha, light and its reflection, and on it goes. So there are then different cultures have kind of come to something that is sounding, and this is the integral insight, right? That are across the different cultures that were actually quite separate, even though there were interactions. They had a lot of room just to figure things out and come up with their own version of things. And they have a lot of coherency. They have a lot of things that kind of line up. A lot of things that, another way you might put it, are like bio-spiritually inherent or bio-spiritually generic. So it seems that we are mapping the same territory as we come up with our maps and finding out what's useful for a human being. Going to your peak experience of the state of that flow and enlightenment up on the mountain, it was about 2010. I entered a phase 2 for a couple of years of what I would call a blowout non-dual state, and I had far more resonance and radiance, and people were like, who are you and what's going on, and all this amazing stuff unfolded. And it was more like a meteor, though, coming into the atmosphere. It was bright and glowing, and then it actually grounded. It grounded into being here, and all of a sudden I was no longer in that state, but I was in the stage of development I was at. And so this interesting insight from the Ken Wilber and Combs state and stages kind of lattice, which we can look up, but that understanding of state versus a stage, and stages develop over time, and states can open up at any time. And they tend to be funded by a certain amount of energy, is how I think of it. Like there was a backlog of all this work that led to, and then transmissions from other people that led to that expansion of that state. And it sounds like something similar happened for you. Maybe a whole lot of past life work as well. A lot of that soul juice was sitting there in potential and waiting for the right environment to pop open. And then we come back to Australia. We come back to Earth, and more about ego and TV and women and wine and music and all the good
it's really, really fascinating, because like when you were chatting, I see there is another Taoist cosmology of like the one life coming down, right? And that's, when you were chatting, I could feel this one is going into, which is kind of like the heavens principle, or the one source. That's the Taoist immortality one is you go into the Dantian, into emptiness, where there's nothing. Like, and so it's kind of like there's no sound, there's no nothing, and so it's like at the center of our galaxy, there's like the black hole that everything's like, we're all orbiting around the sun, the solar principle, but yet we're emptying around this deep emptiness of the void or nothingness. And so this type of awakening, and what's kind of cool about it, is it's almost like a cosmic birthing in the Dantian, because I remember having in that experience, having a dream in my Dantian, not like a dream in the normal scope of how a dream plays out, like this full dream and full music and full activation and there was 8 divine beings inside the Dantian. And I was like, what the hell is it? That was just one of the interesting, fascinating things that kind of emerged. But when we can reset our being with the primordial origin of the void, that is the type of awakening I'm experiencing that's not necessarily the strong downpour of kind of light, but it's a different life that's like kind of it's weird, because in that there can be no sickness, because in emptiness there is no form. So the body has to completely reset itself. So with providing that you're able to access it and practice it and purify the heart particularly, the whole body can reset itself. And so there's some, yeah, it's like, I just want to, I don't know how to properly language it, but it's different to like the downward current versus like emptiness.
Yeah. And
Yeah, it's fascinating.
there's multiple ways of coming out and framing it. Another one for me, you know, my first kind of a waking up experience was actually as a kid, and I blew out into emptiness. And so I'm a 12-year-old kid. I went into emptiness, and by that was like, I know after the fact it was 45 minutes that I was not present to manifest reality, and I wasn't even present to any sense of identity. There was just awareness. And so it's really hard to explain that, except that it then kicked off a evolutionary process of the Kundalini awakening and all the shadow stuff coming up. So a lot of growing up and cleaning up got put on high burner, whether I wanted it or not. And so there's that very much from emptiness can then come this enhealthment, this this impulse of life to come back to a healthier, optimal, delicious manifested form. And that causes the growing up and cleaning up and showing up kind of thing. That's one way to sense it. As I've then deliberately gone back in to connect more with the heart, more with love, or in through meditation, coming into a sort of like drawing back to the stillness, drawing back to the root, coming back into that emptiness, that rest, I've then found there can be a going through actual void where there is no self, no sense, there's not even a witness awareness left to know that it was aware. And that can be utterly terrifying, and utterly can lead to actual sense of dark night of the soul, not just a mini dark night of the soul, like I broke my toenail or I've lost my job, but total all of reality kind of dark night of the soul, and it's been destroyed or dissolved into nothing. And on the other side of that is then divinity, more purely divinity. So that's what I'm playing with now. So I used to be all about then coming back into that emptiness, but then I'm noticing on the other side of the void is what I will call then the great mystery, and actual divinity can play through all of that. But again, this gets really hard to talk about, and it can sound, it's like a whole bunch of words.
Yeah.
How does it feel to you, though?
Oh yeah, great. I love it. I think like I feel your connection to the emptiness, and then what's interesting is I feel, and I'm like, oh wow, that feels really great. And like, even though we've known each other, there's now this resonance of that, so now that's just been brought into the field of our connection now, and so then that is now permeating around, and yet I can feel the different point of where it happened, and so then there's a subtle quality of, you know what I mean, and so then I'm like, oh okay, cool, because that, I don't know, I just find that's just like, my ears are like, wow, okay,
that actually goes back to I think the very first moment I had a private minute with you. We were at someone else's house. We're going back, 2015 or something. And you're like, oh, I'm going to show you these Qigong moves. I'm like, cool, show me your Qigong, dude, like whatever, and you did these couple of moves, and I watched, like I was looking at your shoulder and then your elbow and your wrist. And as you moved and came into position, there was like an awareness of shimmering white consciousness, then going into the dark void emptiness of spaciousness opening up in pristine stillness, and that it happened then in each of the joints. And that blew my mind, because I'd never seen it. I'd never even thought about it happening in one spot. And then here I am hearing you say, oh, where I felt you go access the emptiness from this embodied form is from a different place. So it's like there are different gateways, there are different doorways, even if it gets into the same degree of emptiness.
I love having this conversation because it's informing, like, and you know, because like, you can only, like, what's the sound of a person clapping in the forest if no one else is there? You know, but hey, but now that there's two people clapping, we can actually have some. And so that's blowing my mind. And interesting, I'm performing the Northern Wu style of Tai Chi and Red Dragon at the Health, Harmony and Healing Expo in Atherton. And so if anyone happens to be there on Saturday, if this goes out, then please come join me. But it's through that practice that, and so, all right, so what hit me with that is that every acupressure point is a void center, you know, every acupressure point. So then what happens with the Wu style Tai Chi that I've got, and I'm passionate to really start teaching this and develop it, because I'm understanding it far more deeper now through the lenses of different things of like, wow, how high level this was before, but also why some people never could get it, or as like, so it's great that you're able to see that, because some people may not even notice what the hell is even happening, or that's just movement or just whatever. So what happens is before we move, it's Northern Wu style from Wang Pei Xing, that's my lineage. It's the highest form of integration training I've ever seen, ever, like period, from like a physical embodiment. So like how and why? Am I just saying words or maybe, you know, let me explain. So the physical body, the way that we move, and then the energy body, and our connection to earth, and then the acupressure, the meridian system, and then our mind and our heart, and then the Shen, all have to come into alignment before we move. So it's like fragment. So what you're seeing, what happens is that before I do a move, it's not like, so most Tai Chi are just going la la la. Their mind is not there, right? And so we have a bit of a funny joke in our Tai Chi thing. It's not to put anything down, but it's like they're not using their mind the way it's meant to. So in our Tai Chi, there's a set of multiple acupressure points that have to be felt into the void of before you move. And then one move, so then your next move, then the next move, then the next move. And so then what happens is the void moves through the physical integration and then Shen and mind. So when you see a master doing, like throwing someone with no force, it's not some like quackery, it's the skill development of deep yin that must manifest as yang. And so there's always, when you touch a person or do whatever, that your embodiment goes through theirs, and you're able to take them off balance in ways that they don't understand. And so that's what I'm loving at the moment as a practice. And it's actually quite difficult. But are you familiar with the Frederick Dodson's 4 levels of energy, 4 levels of consciousness? So really, I've only just got into it the last few months from Scott Alford in a marketing and sales training, talking about it.
Before you go into that, though, just to say something about, as you were describing that, like, that's what I saw, that's what I was watching.
I know, that's what's kind of like mind blowing. Yeah.
And trying to bring this back to the wake up, grow up, show up piece, and that while I'm seeing the blending of the yin and the yang, so the discipline to pay attention, bring awareness into the form and through the layers and different dimensions, right through to spirit, or right up to spirit, however you want to conceptualize it, right? That integration of the monadic soul and the actual body, and it's that deep alignment with actual presence that then, it's delicious, but also amazing things can be manifest, as you were saying, like the yin into the yang. And I just made a connection then back to the Kashmir Shaivism lineages and the practice of Shaktipat. You know, they call it the descent of spiritual energy, but really it's a master who's deeply able to take not only like an acupressure point, but basically every cell of their being into the emptiness, and then touch somebody or look at somebody or intend for that person to get basically a jolt of the yang, alivening, kundalini, chitti shakti, to open up a state, have that awakening. So interesting that different lineages, you know, are using the same kind of nature of reality to cause, you know, effects and for beautiful, good ways generally. Anyway, so it's just wanted to resonate.
No, that's so good. It's like we're using the nature of reality. It's a technology of that, you know, and that it's principle based, and that's the, you know, for me anyway, that's the key thing that I would love anyone that I'm working with to understand. It's like principles of nature that we're working with, you know, like it really, and it is the integration of that. Yeah, so that, like it's been interesting to rework with that again, and feel why I have resistance in practicing that, or at least I have. I've only, you know, I'm performing now, and so that's the motivation to get back into it. And but just like all of a sudden appreciating the spiritual training that is in that, beyond the martial arts aspect even, is kind of what's really, really alive for me at the moment. And trying to communicate that you're the only other person I've ever met, honestly, like, because I usually, and it's the law of resonance, you know, like you can only really understand or appreciate another person based on the resonance that you know what I mean? Like the equal opposite resonance, even if it's not exactly the same, if it's deep enough in similar territories, we're able to go, you know, oh, this is what's going on. And I think this is somewhat why sometimes, like, where I struggle from this deep Taoist, and also that particular lineage of Tai Chi and all the other training, it's like, you know, you go into rooms and how would you say it? You know what I mean? Like it's often not seen or it's heard. And I feel like my little child here is like, oh, has it been seen or heard or you know, but like, and a lot's just integrating in and around that, and a lot's landing and making sense, kind of around that all. And this has been a fascinating conversation, you know, like to really and need it. Like I'd love to be able to have more chats on this, because I think it's really valuable to deepen our both of our understandings of what we do, and the transmission that happens between this. Yeah, it's fascinating.
And that's the value, you know, of sangha, of a community of practices. It's in that reflection you actually get affirmation and refinement. Like, that's what I'm doing. That's, and you get these other insights. We're getting more awakening from each other just by interacting. And for me, that's what life's doing. It's waking itself up for the sheer play and fun of it, you know. Other times it's breaking itself down, and you know, all the things are happening, of course. But I took you off track because you were about to mention this 4 types of energy, another framework, another map.
Yeah. I love it, this map, because it's really, really simple, and it's probably a really good entry point for some people. But it's like 4 levels of energy, which then correlate to 4 levels of consciousness. So one's reactive, which is you know, we're like, just being reactive, and the other one's willful, like we're like, okay, you know, what you know, someone says something to us in reactive, and you know, we're in a reactive state. Willful is like, what times do it need to get this done? We activate the will, we push through, we get it done. Then the other one is intellectual, so we're intellectually informed with how we're going to do and what we're going to be. And the other one is intuitive. And so 87% of the world, particularly news, is in that reactive consciousness. It's like fear driven, and they're willfully trying to push through an agenda. It's not like trying to get people to think, trying to get people to expand and to intuitively connect in, to create a better humanity or whatever. And so with those 4 levels, what I find is most intuition is actually reactive as well. You know what I mean? Like, because they haven't cleared up their emotional body, or learned some maps or some frameworks. And so a lot of spiritual people, it's like, oh, well, I just felt that was the way to go. And it's like, you know what I mean? And as a result of it, and you can't argue with it, because it's like they're in that reactive state. And there might be a presence of like life coming through it, of course, but usually it's like reactive. And so this is I guess it's part of it growing up.
One sentence on that. It's like, I was listening to my gut, and I'm like, well, was that my deeper intuition? I'm like, well, is that intuition based in your soul or on your trauma? You know, and this is have you grown up and cleaned up part, you know?
Yeah, well, if you look at the gut, it's like you know, like large intestine. And so, you know, you've got shame, you've got guilt, you've got reason. You know, like reason is because it's the gut instinct of, hang on a minute, that doesn't feel like that. It is a form of reason, you know. And it's like, also every organ and every chakra system has a chakra system within it as well, and all that type of, you know, micro and macro things that are unfold. I mean, it can get complex when you get into that, and that's very good for diagnosing certain things, because it can also rule your consciousness if you're like, oh, everything's got to, I can get. And I guess it's the same thing of when you handed me way back. You gifted me. You sent up all those books on Ken Wilber's work, and you're like, look, it's probably going to be I forget, and I think Ken Wilber's got a line in it as well. It's like it's basically going to, what it's saying. It basically, you probably know, but basically, it's going to break your consciousness. That wasn't the word, but it's literally, it's going to, you know what I mean? It's going to go to town on the way that you think first, and probably be a little bit hard before it gets better. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if you've got anything on saying that for someone who's going to get into integral consciousness and how to integrate that.
Well, I think any of these maps, so whether it's integral, whether it's the one that you're distilling from the Taoist and other life experiences, or whether, you know, whichever map you get, you know, and I'm currently really liking a 10-dimensional map. It has this 8-9 main realms of consciousness and all these other things, right? And it's just the latest map, and every one of them stretches the mind, which then reorientates how you perceive experience and how you make sense, so how your process of living unfolds and changes, and that's the value of it, but it's also the pain of it. So it's a death process, because you're kind of you're breaking open what was working for you to some degree, and maybe to some degree you'd reach the limits of that map, so you were in pain enough to want to take on a new map, but it's still a death process. Like, oh my God, I'm the wicked witch of the West. I'm melting because my worldview's dying, my lenses, my sense making, my how I perceive reality is crumbling, so that it can be reformed, so it can come into a new, stretched, more expanded, more awake, you could say, maybe more grown up model. And there's the hard part. I think it's what's hard about any kind of transformation, whether you're engaging with it intentionally or not, because life is doing this to us anyway, ready or not. New information comes in, new people come into our life, and we have to update our maps. And we have to find out where they're wrong and where they're limited, and that's painful when we're identified with it.
That's funny, because like, I've done a lot of work around astrology. I've also got, at a past life where I was in the Temple of Jupiter. It's in Lebanon. It's Baalbek. It's a real mysterious ancient site. Temple of Venus is next door to it, and a lot of historians stay away from it. And the modern version of history is, you know, versus the actual stories. There's you know, anyway. So that's but talking about astrology as a map. So I always thought I was born at 3:30 in the morning. And because it was written, I swear it was written on a spoon, and I can't find that spoon, but I'm sure it wasn't. So my whole life, I thought I was born at 3:30 in the morning. And then one day I was just sitting there, maybe integrally thinking, and like, well, I was a cesarean born baby. And unfortunately, I would have preferred to be natural born. And I did unpack some frustration of the bastard who cut me out early of my natural cycle. You know what I mean? Like, when I was doing deep shadow work, it was like, that was one of the around kind of like womb work, etc. But anyway, and it was like, just recently I found out that I was like, I connected the dots. I was like, wait up, cesarean, they wouldn't have been booked in at 3:30 in the morning to do a cesarean, but you know what I mean? So that is that. So let me ask some questions. And when I asked, it, like, for whatever reason, I didn't get clear answers, and then I was able to more calmly ask the right questions. And then it was like, they were like, oh, it was daytime, so it's more likely 3:30 p.m. And I said, yeah, it was probably like that time. So then I looked at it, and particularly like our rising sign from one of the Trans-Himalayan teachings, it's like, it's the note of the soul. And it's kind of like the note that brings alive the transmission of kind of why we're touched by humanity, and kind of like how we want to express our divinity, if you will, via the soul. And so it was Gemini, which is let humanity emerge love. So I'd identified all of my ways of being to that, and then it turns out that it's Capricorn. And then there's a couple, like, rather than a Pisces moon, it was Aries, and so I've done a lot of deep work of, you know, collapsing polarities and identifying it. But it was such a beautiful divine lesson, because I got to really deeply see how much my ego was identified with the map, you know, of how and even though I logically know that the map, you know, is just a guide, but it's just funny how the ego likes comfort, like certainty, likes identification, and so that was kind of been a fascinating unpacking, and such a great reminder to pop me outside of maps again, and to just go like, well, you know what I mean? It's not the map. It's yeah. So that was just I think a really funny kind of a story there. Like, and then anything like from our name to where we grew up to our cultural identification, and like there's biological factors that are probably true and more present, and environmental factors that are probably more true and more present, and also like we also have to unpack, well, what, hang on a minute, like what is being left here that isn't true? You know, that classical story of the little girl that said, Mum, why do you cut off the sides of the roast? And she's like, actually, I don't know. Let me ask my mum. She asked my mum, and she's like, I don't know. Let me ask the great grandmother was still alive. And she's like, my oven was this big. I cut it off because, you know, like, that's why. And this little innocent girl just asked the mum, like, why are you cutting it off? And she's like, I don't actually know. Let me, you know. And so it was like, generationally, what have we gathered that we need to clean up and look at objectively to be able to unravel so we can express the fullness of us? And I think going back to emptiness, that's the beauty. Beyond all, the awakening that happens in emptiness is not necessarily light. It's the revelation of purity of what is, you know, not like an awakening of shit, I need to do this because Catman's coming, or even a bolt of intuition or whatever. It's more of the purification and resetting of the system at a deep level that allows an emerging from what I call the gut, or the gut, like the cosmic origin of our unfolding. And so that's interesting even on the gut level too, right? Because you got womb, you got dantian, you got sacral center, then you've got the large intestine, and you've got the emotional link up to the heart. And so it's not as clear cut as like what we make it to be in maps, you know what I mean? And levels of growth.
And we need it to be that simple. It's not as clear cut, but we need it to be that sometimes to be able to even have a conversation, you know, because otherwise you look at anything and it just fractally, you know, gets more and more complex. And it's like something you said before, it's like, cool, you can go into a chakra, and then the chakra has a chakra system, and it's like, again, there's this fractal nature of reality, which can be useful when you're trying to really be very precise in diagnosing something, or knowing how to treat something, and get very, very efficient and effective at creating some change that you want to create. But otherwise, it's like, well, you know, I don't want a map that is the territory, because I defeats the point of having a map. So what's my simple map? But this dynamism, like balancing yin and yang, for me is knowing when to zoom in and when to zoom back out, and how to have that flow, and when it's appropriate. Like, now is a good time to go right into the detail, and now is a good time to zoom out and have a 3-step map of all of existence, you know, and all the stages in between. As I'm thinking about this, it's then also a flow in time. It's like, when is it good to look back? When is it good to look forward? When is it good to be just in the present? You know, and you find teachings about doing all of those things, and they tend to exclude all of the other things. And it's like, well, hang on, that's the integral insight. Transcend and include. Don't, if you're cutting everything out, you're kind of losing a bit of reality here. But finding that dynamic midpoint where it's aligned with what's happening in life, where the aliveness is, you know, that's kind of where I've come to that. How to balance, like, this, with the head, with the heart and the gut, and it's an ongoing question. So a couple things come up though, like you're talking about that meatloaf, cutting the edges off. It's like, it's really good to know when to question, you know, when to unpick, when to make look, what's unconscious here. Let's expand the blinkers. Let's look further into the system. Let's look back deeper in time, deeper into ourselves, deeper into higher dimensions of reality. Let's look through the social systems of how we're making meaning, constructing power, or whatever it is. And it's good to know when to stop and when to come back and go, it's meatloaf, you know, or it's you know, what it is, just eat it. And otherwise the thing's gone cold and it's useless, and you just wasted all this time and effort, right? So again, this is really tricky to figure it out in our day-to-day, you know, experience, but I think it's the right kind of question. It's the right problem or challenge to be focused on. It's the dynamic balance point between expanding, contracting, questioning, and accepting, or allowing things to solidify, yin and yang, you know. You know, that's, yeah, it's exciting to riff off what you're saying, and then to sort of really express this out loud and sort of clarify it. It's like, oh, that's what I've been doing. You know, that's what I do with clients, is help them figure out where is my dynamic management point. You know, how do I sense check? Is it worth keep deep diving? Do I need to keep doing shadow work, or do I need to lighten up? Or do I need to just go out and live and play a bit? You know, and so where's the integration point?
Yeah.
I get excited.
Yeah. So it's really fascinating.
One thing I'll throw up as well, it's like, well, we're talking about transformation, and someone's listening to this, hearing about all these maps, and saying, oh, I don't know about all these maps. I haven't got decades to spend like these guys have, you know, reading all these books or studying up in these mountains with these masters. I'm here in the middle of a pandemic with climate change happening, and, you know, wondering where my food's coming from. You know, what's the point? Why would any of this be useful? Why should anyone care? And I've got my immediate answer to that, but I would love to hear, you know, I'll put it to you, or I can answer it straight up, being a bit cheeky, putting you on the spot.
Oh, no. Welcome, man. You know, it's authentic conversation. You know, we didn't have a plan or a script, and I think that's what's beautiful about it is and so what if I get vulnerable and freeze up? You know, like great, that's just what I get to move through. And but yeah, I think the when it comes to it comes down to language, and we can only do better when we know better, right? And so the benefit of learning maps is the ability to communicate to more of the community, more of the tribe, more different age groups. I'm just like even different ways to communicate to your grandfather or your grandmother or your children or different people that you meet to help even our own selfish unfolding of like positioning where we are. Because like even when we say selfish unfolding, I should say there's a reason why we equipped our own oxygen masks first. There's a reason why you know we need to top our own cup up first. And they say in China, like activate your internal strength, like have a bucket. So then if you fill someone else's cup, you're not taking your full cup and then emptying yourself. You want to be fully full and alive before you give. Anyway, so the part of language is it's like maps, and that is it's allowing the identity and the resistance of the mind and whatever we're feeling to allow yourself to feel safe, to be able to communicate in different lenses that you'll discover more of who you be, not less. And you'll have more comfort in navigating the unknown, and you'll have more resonance and life to be able to communicate with more people. Why I think that's important is because the solution isn't it's more integrally alive than it is a one. And then even within that, it could be one group that leads the way more than another at one particular time and place. But then at least we're able to flow energy and have an alive way of communicating and a more of an inclusive way of doing life that isn't, you know, mind over matter or one way wins or whatever it is. We can have space for all of life to emerge. And we feel, I found I feel a lot more safer to go into different places because I can realize when I'm in or I'm out or I'm over, you know, and even just hearing the language through maps and models as it grows and it progresses, it's like, oh wow, like there's just, you know, you said a lighten up before, and automatically I'm like, man, I think have I been in the, you know, just because it's like I've got that reference point, but I've kind of like haven't spoken that tone for a little bit. It's like, oh, and right now it's hitting me with a different note, which is like, just go out and have way more fun, you know, and just like that, like sometimes we get so serious with the work that we forget about the innocence of just play and dance and just enjoying life, however that means, you know, like for me, it was nightclubs and bars back in the day, you know, like it was, that was how I used to lighten up in amongst wherever my development journey was then. And yeah, before the wake up stage kind of forces upon the development process, I think. So, yeah, so I'd love to hear your part too.
Yeah, I really resonate with what you said and how you described it. Great articulation. And, you know, I'm kind of to sum it up as it resonates. It's like having maps and new models and new frameworks for thinking and sense making gives us better capacity to translate. And so we can connect more with life. I connect with the unknown. I can connect with family, friends, different people, right? So, we've got a very busy, complex globe right now, and we've got a lot more means of connection. So actually being good at connecting as a human is becoming more important. That's one. The other one, I guess, is that yeah, it gives us an internal reference point, a prompt to go, oh, am I getting fixated or fundamentalist on something where I should be opening up, or am I leaving something out that I should be including in? So that's that sort of self-checking. And I agree, it makes me feel so much more safer. If I can go into any situation, any relationship, any dynamic, and I've got my own internal meta reference point to go, oh, that's why I'm out of balance here. Oh, okay, that's why that thing's throwing me off. And I'm therefore I'm not playing out shadow with the other person. I'm instantly able to do my own internal shadow work, my own internal sort of growing up and work to develop skills where I might need to counterbalance things to be able to better be in that moment. And then why would I do any of that? Well, if it's not self-evident, I think we come at from the basic things in life. We come at something because it's a pain, or because we've got something to gain. So we're in fear, we're in suffering, we're sick, or there's a struggle in our attention, or we're some sense of lack or some sense of problem, right? And that drives us to seek relief, and in that we might seek a new model, we might seek a practitioner who can model things to us or help explain relevant pieces of maps that could be useful. Or we go, I've seen what he's done, and my joints don't do that going into emptiness thing. I want what he's got. And so there's something to gain. There's an opportunity because I've seen, that there's more. And that's just exciting. So between here and death, it's like, wow, I want to have more of that. And so I get to live, for me, again, is following aliveness. So the maps help us, I think, with all of those kind of things. And I guess it explains to me, or speaks to that deeper issue of why we do transformation. Why would anyone seek out transformation? And I guess it's because that pain or gain, and it's just an interesting thing. And some of us can't help it either. We're just given to it. It's,
Yeah. Man, there is a lot of pain without knowing the territory, or like not having choice. Because you don't without having a map, there's so many choices that just aren't available. Like, it's not that they're not available, you don't, like, awareness is the catalyst that generates choice. Map gives you awareness, and then so without the map, without frameworks, and not just even the map, like the embodiment practices that make it come alive and be enjoyable. Otherwise you just sit in the pain, and you sit in the problem, and then there's going to be a consequence that's soon going to manifest, that eventually will kick you back onto the path to look for a process, a method, or a way out, and to find something that you resonate with, that like and trust, to be able to like get on that path sooner. Because what I love about where we're at is you get to help people so much. Like, what I mean? Sometimes I'm like, like I've got students at different ages, or different people I work at different ages. I'm like, man, like, it's so good, like, that you're 23 and you're getting this now, like I wish that would have been my experience, and yet it's all perfect at the same time. And I think, like, also, like, our capacity for life and caring for people gets deepened. Like, as an example, like in relationships, because you can feel where the development level is, and rather than being triggered by it and getting into all the unconscious shadow bouncing back, you can sort of go, oh, okay, this is where the support is needed, and you're already there. But you don't have to wait till, or if it does come up, you're already, you can actually go drop in and go, oh, okay, this is what's needed here, and so I can be more supportive. But also, it's like the maps go up and out, and our whole body is the map, right? And so this is an indigenous culture. It's like, this is the country, this is the country. So what's happening here is happening outside. So the more I'm aware of my country, the more I'm aware of my interaction with all of life. I can understand what's happening in the rivers and why it's bad because of what's happening in here. But I think maps and transmission and embodiment and like initiation and doing the work, what it does is it strengthens our capacity to be able to nourish and have the ability to give and receive freely. Like, our capacity for life is how much we can give and receive, and maps give us that ability to link up to all of life. It strengthens our capacity to receive and give so much more, and also know our boundaries with that. And it's fascinating, like, because I'm far more better off as a result of the maps and models, and it's not just the maps and models, it's the integration of how to bring that into the body and bring it into the country and into the life, you know, like, which is, it's a process, and it gets to be fun, it gets to be enjoyable, it gets to be like, and when you get good at it, you know that those moments are like, that would normally throw you off rail, you're just sitting with that awareness and presence, and you're like, wow, I'm feeling depressed today, you know, or I'm feeling like off my center, or and it's not a big deal, like, because the mind has learned to let go and surrender to enough to trust that there's a way through it. And yeah, I know you do too. I love like sharing these moments with people. At the core of it, that's what makes humanity more relatable to all of life, you know. Otherwise we get so egocentric, you know, like another map, since we're here, is like ego, ethno, world centric, galactic centric. Without maps, it's very likely we're going to be egocentric. There'll be good qualities of that, and there'll be shadow qualities of that. And then ethnocentric, there'll be good and bad. But then how do you even know? And then on world centric, like I went live last night, and I had this frustration because I'm on a world centric level. I feel like I need to be saying something with what's going on, you know, and like I'm not sure how to process this, because I'm feeling the whole world is moving on the mental plane, and they're having a crisis of working out everyone's different points of view, and there's so much more of a transparent society, and then there's like censoring and all sorts of stuff. So it's like oh, and I'm feeling, and so the maps were able, and just being able to talk it through on my own sort of like little live, it enabled me to integrate what I needed to do and bring that back into center and sort of like process it. Without that, I would be polarized and in that reactive state of consciousness. And as a result, my intellect and my intuition is going to be filtered by the shit. You know, it's not going to be pure. Even my willful actions is because like I'm not feeling like I'm enough, or I'm stuck, or whatever the narrative or feeling may be. What is it, Monday, Tuesday, you know, or Sunday?
Oh, beautiful. There's so much richness in what you said. I also agree with a couple of your key phrases. One is that awareness is the capital that gives you the freedom of choice. Or I might be inserting freedom there, but and for me, this speaks to the value of awakening, is you've got this illumination, this space, this awareness that gives you the inner freedom, that gives you more choice. And that's why I know I personally have a innate hunger to pursue more awakeness and more of being able to sit in the emptiness, more able to relax back into not being, into being, and then into form again, because it gives me much greater freedom in any moment, any relationship, any situation, to be at choice. And that just feels good. Plus it's more effective and efficient, all those kind of lovely things. And then I love where you went with it, that it actually gives us, and it really speaks to the heart of life, that means we can show up in service. It means we can be more loving and compassionate. It means we can be with others who are not in their free state, who are in a point of being bound or suffering or really struggling right now. You know, and we all go into it and we all come in and out of it at different times. So it's going to be us too, you know. And that's probably the non-dual insight, is the more we can manifest that love and capacity to be with others, we're actually being with ourselves, we're being with totality in a beautiful way. What was that, the next thing? Developmentally, so if I go back to Ken Wilber, that's right, I wonder about Robert Keegan. He's the master psychologist from Harvard, wrote a number of great books, and Ken Wilber's a good fan of his and quotes him a few times. And one of his things is that all development is going from subjective to objective. So you are it, you're immersed in it. So maybe you just are the ego, like a pair of glasses. You don't even know you're wearing them. And that development, or awakening you could call, is that moving back and going, I can see the glasses now. Now I've got choice to wear them or not wear them, put different colored glasses on, get the focus fixed, right? And so that's the value of a map. The other insight from developmental psychology is that the lines of development, so our cognitive line of development, i.e. our explicitly our ability to make maps, right? Put concepts and put them on a page or put them into words, and just how sophisticated and complex we can do that, and how much of reality we can put into a map, even though it's always wrong. To be useful, it's wrong, but it's like a really good, usefully wrong map. That leads all other lines of development. So it's necessary, but not sufficient for deeper moral development or deeper aesthetic, kinesthetic movement development. So it's like you had to have, and I would say for spiritual development, you have to have some degree of cognitive development to reach the higher stages of manifesting more precision and mastery in any other dimension. And it doesn't mean there are not amazing saints who are just a big radiant heart and can hardly speak, right? But that India's got all sorts of characters like that. But from a developmental psychology point of view, and this is the growing up part, that it's worth having better maps, not only for that internal experience and more freedom and choice, but because then we can actually develop ourselves in all the other ways so much more easily. It enables it. And you may want that, or you might feel driven to it, or your life circumstances might require it, and that's why you'd come to it. So waking up, growing up, cleaning up, shadow work, getting more skillful means, showing up in service. This is the tricky one I want to point to, because we're both practitioners, but I wouldn't say that we're fully enlightened masters by any stretch of the imagination, no offense, right? We're very much human, we're in it, we're in our process day in, day out. But at some point you cross some threshold where, I've got to give back. Or this is the context within which I give so that I can keep receiving from life, so that there is this cycle of flow. Could you talk to me about what that was for you? Was there a certain point in time it's like, no, I've got to keep doing my work before I act in service, or was it always a bit of service, a bit of work? What's the story?
That's a fascinating question, and I was brought up in service, and so that is kind of interesting because that happened before I woke up. So then I'm thinking, like, if we were to map it out, it was like, well, how much transmission does the family lineage have around it? And when I look at my family, both sides were in business, and my father's family had a business for 50 years. The cousins that we came over here were, well, it's like hundreds and hundreds. I don't even know, So that level of service comes through. And so, but however, when it comes to development of practice, to be really honest, it was the life, whatever I learned, the life was there, and I wanted to serve it in some way or form right away. Like, if I'm just being completely honest, so how that looks like is like martial arts, wow. And service might have been just showing everyone or whatever it is, or just sharing it with one friend that would have like resonance with. I'm not talking about going out and starting a class and, saying that I'm whatever. It might have been just a couple of moves, like, wow, look at this thing here, links to that there. And so there was some, I don't know whether you'd call it was like sharing or service, but it was definitely, there's a transmission that I was engaged in. That's kind of good from a teaching perspective, because when we start to teach, we actually develop the thing much more deeply than sometimes just being a student. So I think, and there's a lot of great lines here too, because you can all, like there is a level of I wasn't putting a sign up after the first class of martial arts saying I'm a martial arts master and come into my, and stuff like that. So we've got to be like clear on where we're at. And
I think maps really help with that too. We can get situated. It's like, cool, I've had an awakening, I've learned something, and I'll give within context for that, but I'm only at the beginning stages. So, it's not time to start offering a training when I'm still yet to actually go through, a big training process.
Yeah. So if we look at like waking up, like you just said, and okay, growing up or hanging up, there's levels and layers. That's the map. Like, like, okay, if I'm only learning the first few techniques as a white belt, then I can probably share it with just the people that are white belt, you know what I mean? And who are just beginning because I've only just learned like that. That's probably the capacity of what it's at. So that would be where a map would help. It's like, okay, where am I positioned with this? And then, growing up is like all of these states and stages, like these levels continue on through our development in subtle and more coarse sort of ways. And then cleaning up. And what was the original question? Because otherwise I'll end up answering it in a way that I'm piecing it together now.
Oh man, we're just free flowing, and we're just looking, we're just using Ken's little rubric and the showing up, the being of service, and you were answering it, I think. I think you've kind of answered it, which is, and it resonates with me. It's like things came online as a teenager, and I had energetics happening, and I started to have prophetic dreams, and I could, had psychic intuitions and all this kind of stuff, which I had no framework from my upbringing, from my culture, from my family system. It didn't feel like it was coming through my genetic ancestry. It felt like it came from my soul's incarnational history, and that was kind of being woken back up unexpectedly. And so it was very messy, but in the middle of that mess, you're here to be a spiritual teacher. And I was like, what? I'm a teenager, right? Pimply teenager, can't even get the date I want to happen with the girl. And you're talking about being a spiritual teacher. It's like, and all I could feel in the contrast to that sort of almost monadic lightning bolt intuition was all the pain and all the suffering, and where I was not up to that. And so that's kind of guided me as well. It's like, but then I immediately was learning things. I did have things to give, but within context, within where I could, with other white belts, with my family, going, hey, check this out. What do you think of this? And then that's kind of continued for me too. So I then have grown up a bit, and I've cleaned up a bit, and it's ongoing on all counts. It's a daily choice to be sort of leaning into that. And then as I do, I get to be more of service, like more capacities come online, more grace comes into my life, more of the flow of existence becomes magical and re-enchanted and delicious, and service becomes actually the greatest joy. I can kind of hear it in how you're describing some of your stuff with clients. It's like how fulfilling that is to be able to, to give to whether they're 23 or 60, 73, and to give of yourself, and it to be nourishment and useful and wanted. And I think it's one of life's great privileges, frankly, but not everyone wants to have. So. But service, and opening up. I've forgotten that one on Ken's list. Sorry, I'm getting all yang mechanical ticking off the list here.
No, that's totally cool. I just watched something recently of Ken's about probably about a year and a half ago, which is probably not too recent in the time, in the sense of like how much can happen. And I think opening up is something that he's realized is a new level of awakening. So I don't think it's even that prominent in the cycles. I forget, it was the guy with Mind Valley. I forget his name. They were doing an interview with Ken Wilber. But so the way I look at it is okay, once we've awoken up, we've grown up, we've got some perspective both vertically and horizontally of the territory, and what morality and what that means. And then now that we've got that level of capacity, we can tidy up where we need to, what's relevant for what we're doing, whether it's martial arts or spiritual teaching or business or whatever. Like it's sometimes good to get in at least apply it to one of the things that because then it's a lot more manageable, rather than think, I don't have to apply this to everything. Yeah, you could, or you could just apply it to one thing and then because how you do one thing is how you do other things in many ways. And at least it can give more resonance for mastery is our ability to then take what we know and apply it to other areas. So then once we've cleaned up, then we can actually show up in service in the world. And so, but opening up is showing up is more like kind of like, this is the way that I took to it anyway. It was like showing up is like, okay, I'm going to open up my own martial arts store. I'm just like keeping it to martial arts. But then opening up is like, it's really, I guess you could say it's world centric. It's like you're really opening up to the world. I suppose your sphere of influence becomes more global, or more, I don't know, Christ or Buddhic like is what's coming through, So there's spiritual teachers, and then there's the one that's like really like it's really turned that aspect of their development on. So I don't know how, like obviously there's states and stages to that, right? Like we could write a post and it could get shared everywhere, and we could be like, cool, I've opened up, like in that little moment of that little state, that little time, and then on a stage level, I don't know, I guess it really comes down to, it's the same with when people ask me, when people compare success, it's like, well, wait up, what's your definition, and what is, because that could, it could be, that person might actually be way more successful than you are to his definition, you know what I mean? Like, and so you can't even compare that. So then what what do those stages look like for the person's desire or ambitions and stuff like that. I think this is also like integrally, like from the crown chakra place, it's like having then the compassion in the heart to accept that some people may desire to live fully on the land, and that's okay. Like, you know what I mean? Like the whole point of it is for that, is that there, and like, I think what we're passionate about is, and what I was feeling in terms of the importance of this integral movement and the embodiment movement and the transmission movement and coming together, not being separate, not being like, well, you do that style, I do that style, you know, blah, 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 rather than, hang on a minute, what's missing in both our styles, and how do we get to meet more of what's maybe missing in our own system, unless we've truly decided that this is our system. In that case, that's fine. That fits in the integral perspective. But I think what we're resonating with, and what I really can feel it in this conversation, what's important is more people that have this integral capacity for life that can link up more channels and currents around the world. It's like when you explained India to me, I've never been there, so this could be a completely arrogant or ignorant response. But what I've heard about India is, I guess this is more of this monadic life of how it's unfolding. And the image I got was, there's these wonderful beings that are fully awakened, and their culture is based on a lot of beautiful medicine and you know, technology that's wonderful. And then perhaps the growing up phase, sometimes when you say these things, it sounds like insulting, like grow up, like what are you trying to say? Like, but
yeah, that's developmental frameworks. As soon as you start talking development, someone's going to get pissed off and upset, and other people will chase you to get to the top.
Yeah, true.
But it's here.
But however, if we're nourished and linked in the integral perspective, what I feel like that does through groups of beings and for humanity is there's much more pathways for information to flow. So what I would say is the leadership for soul that's coming and humanity that's coming in governance of all type is more of an integral embodied perspective. And because that way frames of information can be lit up through those people, and they can be responsible to lead, because then they can look at it through the lens of just one side, or, okay, I'm going to lead this team of people to look at whatever, but then we need to check in with the other teams. And then, like, ideally, let's just say there's 7 levels or 8 levels, whatever there is. And you might have different teams working that level, but then you all come together and try to learn from the mystery or the magic that's in the center. And maybe more integral leadership is almost tribal council. They consult the groups and sit around and go, well, this is the information that we've got from group, and this is what's alive, not what my mind thinks. Like I had a conversation with a client the other day, and it was, they're going through my Qigong course, and it's very much a traditional awakening of life force, not, and particularly the first stage of it is laying it out and listening to the mystery. And because in the East, it's like you don't get the maps and models, they awaken within your body. Then later on, once you've gone through your development, you know, if you get through some of these later teachings come in. And so then the personal development work is more like, I need an outcome, I need a goal, I need a fixed thing. And then you're trying to force matter or constructs or limitations on what wants to unfold. And basically, if someone's coming through a development stage of waking up through me, it's like your mind is not even going to be, it's going to be more coherent and more connected and more integrated at the end of this. So why even bother having goals? I would rather tell you what it's about so you can manage your time and you know if it's right for you, to see if it's in resonance. But other than that, are you willing to trust the mystery of authentic awakening to go through the process, because you don't know and you can't manage it in mind. And I feel leadership, what I get a sense of is like, it's almost like a new integral version of tribal leadership, where there's different groups managing different things from an integral perspective. But then we gather together as groups that are managing those groups, and we look at the data and the life that's emerging and how, and we go, okay, well, where does the life need to move? Like we've got all these homeless people here, like unless they're like, no, fuck off, I don't want to be homeless, cool, then leave it. But if they're like, yeah, you know what, some clean water, some fresh air, some good plumbing, that would be really nice. Or maybe they're in that much pain that they don't realize that that's what they need. So then, okay, what is the education and the gentleness to say, hey, rather than coming in with a colonialized idea of, I'm going to force
my wisdom on you, like truly getting to know that there's this marketing model. It's like SSF, which is a great way for, it's like S is side lane. So it's like pain, problem, and consequence. So like people don't even know that they have a pain, a problem, or a consequence. So it's not about selling anything or forcing anything. It's about this. This is what frustrates me, by the way, with the whole vax and anti-vax thing. No one's getting properly educated on how they need to make a decision for himself. It's just forced stuff that people have to filter through to get to information. And it's you know, and not one decision. It's not one high almighty decides that this one medicine is going to be, or one way is going to be good for the collective. And so once we break that paradigm, we can actually come up with far better solutions for everyone, because it's not just one idea, we're going to censor and silence this. And, you know, it's like, hang on a minute, intelligence is what Ken Wilber is, like life and intelligence is in every soul. We need to learn how to work together and link all of those networks up so we can truly discover the wisdom that's in the mystery and what wants to unfold far beyond our old frameworks or minds, and not also throw the baby out of the bathwater in that. There's probably some good stuff that we've learned on that development that can be inclusive. But if I'm just stuck on that, I'm just a rationally minded idiot. If I get charged about it,
or
I don't want to say that.
You know, or I'm reacting and acting willfully out of it, you know, one way or the other. Again, fundamentalism and kind of the extremism plays out. Yeah. So you've been riffing on this, and I love it. And it's a phrase Ken has that really comes to mind. I want to bring in, which is the calculus of uncomfort. And you know, he's being a bit bloody wordy and clever. But he's
going to break that.
Break down. So once you come to, okay, he's getting another line. He's got, no one's smart enough to be wrong 100% of the time, right? It's not a little reverse framing. So everyone's got some truth. Everyone's got, and I don't mean just opinion, but they've actually got truth, and they've got a sovereignty that deserves to be respected there for free choice, right? This is a beautiful humanitarian view to have. And if you had that orientation, and then you are willing to go, cool, what's your story? What's the truth happening here? What are your choices based on, you know, what reasoning, and then what's happening over here and here? This is the integrally informed actor can hear these and start to bring them together, but they aren't going to agree. And so there's a calculus of uncomfort. It's like, what's the minimal amount of discomfort we can handle to sort of hold this together, to be able to have like, okay, I don't get along with everyone in my family, but I'd like to have a good Christmas dinner. You know, there's going to be some uncomfort. So who do we seat next to who to minimize the pain and suffering and maximize the flow of good aliveness and exchange, and, you know, the chance for love to manifest, you know. And so and I think that's the job of, whether it's a shamanic practitioner, a healer, you know, martial arts instructor. I think anyone showing up in service, if they're clued into maps and models and start to even think integrally and to have gotten this far into any dialogue we're having, you've got to already be kind of there. Otherwise, you would have checked out, you know, probably 5 minutes in. Then the kind of showing up is going to need to look like this. It's going to need to look like getting diversity of perspectives and opinions, and how to hold them together, how to sit with the incompleteness, the uncertainty, and sort of hold space for that. And it might be on climate change or vaccinations, or on an emotional issue in a relationship, or, you know, a health condition. You know, it could be in any arena of life. It could be in any job, any role. But that quality of showing up with heart, of being able to look for what's been cut out, look for what's been hyperfixated on, so to pull back the excessive yang, pull back the excessive yin, kind of get things back into more flow and harmony. You know, for me, that's showing up. That's what's, you know, and from that, hopefully, we all get to the level of mastery where we do open up, like you were talking about. I think of some of the really big saints, you know, like Amma the Hugging Saint or Mother Mira, and they are just, there is just so much light and aliveness just radiating out to the whole planet at the very least, you know, if not well beyond. What was it? When you were talking about that, I want to weave a few things together, and I'm mindful that we're about to come up on probably 2 hours worth of chat. That opening up to that bigger sphere, and for me, this is a really useful sort of thing. I often work with my clients. Like, cool, you're expanding, you're awakening to a bigger sphere of concern, which might, wow, I'm caring about global issues, or I'm caring about cosmic issues, right? But we're still just this small individual human. And if I can drown in trying to take ownership of all of that global issue, or I can fall over in delusion of thinking I can change the whole world by myself, you know, like, and so again, these two extremes to look out for. So what's my scale of influence? So, or you could flip it the other way. My scale of concern is global. My sphere of influence is actually small. It's today in my timeline. I've got half an hour to do something. What can I do as a practice that's going to align me and serve those around me, that is in alignment with addressing climate change and a pandemic and dealing with uncertainty and social polarization and aggravations going on. So that, for me, that framing then brings us back into the present, brings us back to sort of connecting, I guess, the head, which can go out to bigger sphere of influence or big scale of concern, and bring it down into what I can manage and handle and ground and really nourish that root, come back to the, you know, what can I actually anchor in the here and now and bring through from abundance, from a generosity and actual service that isn't depleting and destroying me to do it, you know. Yeah, on a riff. Does that resonate? Make sense?
Oh yeah, it really does. Because like last night, that was exactly what I unpacked what you said, and you just really gave me another like a reference point in different language around what is the sphere of influence. Because like I think it's Ken Wilber's got those two, like egocentric, ethnocentric, world-centric, galactic-centric, and so last night I was like, you know, pulled out in the world. Oh, like, you know, like shit, like what am I meant to do? And right, basically it's probably like when we're in a storm, right? Things are just like our roots like, fuck, can we handle this? But then it's just like, well, hang on a minute. Like, what is actually my sphere of influence? Like where am I at? And so then if you look at the ethnocentric aspect, it's like, well, what are the groups that I'm standing in? You know, what are the groups that my family, my friends, my business things, whether it's sporting or whether it's a spiritual group or whatever it is. Like that's the part that I get to manage. And then if you want to go deeper in that, it's like, all right, well, how are they impacting the world? And the world can be our community, you know, it can be our family, it can be our, like if the Confucius wisdom is like, if you can manage yourself well, you know, you'll manage your home. If you can manage your home well, you'll manage the city. If you can manage your city well, you'll manage your state. And so it's like coming back into that frame of like, you know, sometimes like shit, I was like caught out in the world centric, whole buzz of it all, and feeling responsible and you know, lots of like wind and just I was just like, and I just that's basically where I came full circle. I was like, hang on a minute, what do I need to do to nourish my root? What groups am I in, and what is my purpose of that? Are they servicing the world, and how? Like if you've got, because the thing is, the trouble is when our soul comes online. So a crisis cracks the personality and brings that soul on, and all of a sudden we have a soul awakening, which sometimes can be different to the non-dual aspect of it. And it's like, fuck, I want to help the world. I want to, and we feel it so truly. We're willing to live or die for that essence of the soul, because it's kind of, it is like immortal in its sense. The soul does die in a different conversation, going into a different, but that could freak people out. That could be a whole different thing.
It's another conversation.
Yeah, and actually, it can also just be like an ego death too. It can have its own dying and rebirthing, but it's immortal in its sense. At least at the core of it, it's got this spiritual back power, and so we're willing to live and die for that because we know we're invincible to stand for that love that we feel for humanity. And then that's again when the cleanup phase, if we haven't cleaned up our astral body, or, you know, as an example, like when you said earlier, we get that knock on the door, like, oh, I'm meant to be a spiritual teacher, which felt like a lie. But for some people, it's like, I'm the next Christ, or I'm downloading Christ, or I'm, you know, and it's some astral projection of maybe what humanity collectively has got buzzing around about that, or whatever. So that's the saying of like, punch a hole up and download God conscious, you know, download download the purity of what's coming alive, and then we're not in the astral field. A lot of people wake up, but they're still identified with the astral field, or all of a sudden I wasn't connected to my emotions,
now I'm connected to the shamanic fields and everything's communicating to me. I must be chosen. I must be the one. And you know, there can be a lot of complexities with that level on the personality to clean up. And yeah, so I think it's just coming back to the sphere of influence, like you said. Not fully coming from the root and being anchored, we actually cause polarization in the field. And a lot of teachers out there today are great what they do, but they're transmitting from where they are, not supporting people with the root that they need to get to where they are. And as a result of it, we know that that's truth, but then it's like we buzz around the polarity of it and we can't position ourselves. And so then it creates more polarization in the field. And then of course, that's going to also, that's also not bad. That actually can be a part of the awakening. And so I think it's like, from a spiritual teacher, just having the responsibility of am I really anchoring and nourishing my community, or is there a path to get to here as well? Has been my learning versus like, wow, this is what's alive and this is what we want to share. So
yeah, so that resonates so much, and it brings me, I think, what I want to kind of wrap up and conclude our conversation with is almost back at the beginning. What are practices, right? We've spoken from as practitioners, but we haven't actually said what practices are. We've mentioned bits and pieces through it. But if someone's listening to this, I think the overall insight is, you know, get your maps orientated, get situated, and do your practice, so that you can grow up and clean up and show up. And that basis, from my point of view, never leaves. I think it's going to be a case of endless awakening, endless growing up, endless cleaning up and showing up. And maybe I'll get to the point of really opening up. I don't know, right? But for you, what are the practices? And you've mentioned a few of them, but just what are the things that your being loves to do that you find nourishes the root, brings you into alignment, helps you grow up and clean up and show up?
Yeah. What I spend pretty much doing every day is so I do embodied I Ching work, which has 4 pillars to it. Has one pillar is maps, because that's what we've all been chatting about. The next one is corrective exercise for restoring the yin. So that way, so there's 56 movements, 8 per chakra, that correlate with the 8 elements of the I Ching. And then alchemy, which is a way of bringing energy and frequency through the resonance of those 8 elements to each different chakra system, which can clear all sorts of stuff, addictions, emotional patterns, etc. And it's a lot more kinder on the emotional body, I found, because it's more energy and frequency. And then also divination, in order to build the divine mind, but also to understand the framework of how yin yang and Shiva Shakti are integrating. I use the embodied I Ching, which is a unique method that I created to be able to use divination in a way that is not my ego coming up with a random question, that is actually, well, what's missing in my body, and using muscle testing through the maps to reveal what element and what chakra. And then I can go in and use the maps again to sort of coach myself into, and then take it to the I Ching, which gives me resonance for what's moving in the field to help me. Because sometimes a yes is still a yes, but it might be just go slow, or it might be, oh no, path's open, go for it. Or it might be like, okay, yes, but there's going to be some difficulty at the beginning, but then it's going to open up. So the I Ching gives us these frameworks. So I use that that's what helps me integrate. And then I also teach, that's what I'm passionate about. Daily, what I'm doing is the Wu style Tai Chi, which is what we sort of tapped on, which I love. And I do Red Dragon and Blue Dragon. And so I do Red Dragon, a standing practice, and a seated practice almost every day. And then I have 2 other main Kung Fu styles that I sort of, which I like, one of them's Baji Genda, which is a Taoist warrior art. And I sort of pick and choose in between what I will practice. So sometimes I do a lot of the standing Janjong. And I just, I think you've seen me
in these poses
Yeah.
and certain things we've
I
done.
was like, whoa, powerful.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny because you're able to see what a lot of people aren't able to see, which is I think why we resonate too a lot. And also another one, which is the Hongmo, which is it's a Chan Buddhist Taoist integrated system, very very Taoist, heavy though. It's a bit of an integration of both, and I practice that as my art of movement and kind of like empowerment. I'm into the battlefield art, so I like the fascination of life and death, and to live for another day, and to train the body and the mind, and so I kind of am playing in those little fields. That's my main sort of oh, and then of course like sexuality, like that's a huge part that I am still growing in. Out of all of the things that I do, that's the part that I'm bringing more conscious embodiment and presence to. Like there was a lot of Playboy days, but I don't necessarily. That's probably more shadow work than in an unconscious way versus like you know working through that. So yeah, and then it's like the whole integral thing. Some days it's like there's intuition is like, well, you haven't really anchored in with spirit or soul, or like even today there's been stuff that I have to let digest and assimilate that will influence the way that I show up more fluidly or differently as well. So that's really it. And I'd love to also like hear what's alive for you, and yeah, what are your practices to sort of self-manage and reflect and all that?
Yeah, well, first of all, just to mention, I've received from Ben Marin, one of your practitioners in the Embodied I Ching. I've experienced that work, and it was beautiful. The transmission then of particular, Gaia elements coming through certain chakras, working for multiple days. I'm like, oh, this is good. This is good chi. So I can highly recommend it.
Thanks, mate.
Like, if I think about practice, it's like your orientation, as you just sort of summed it up, was a battlefield arts, right? And I would say my sort of overall orientation is coming from a healing art. It's come from a, oh shit, something's going wrong. I'm in pain or suffering. I've had a breakthrough experience that then kind of shattered my mind. What am I doing? It's like so that's kind of with the motivation foundation, that's kind of my character in life. And if I look back, I can see that I've gone into different lineages and different practices, a touch of martial arts, a whole lot of the tantric sort of Kashmir Shaivite, but that's from a meditation mantra, repeating sacred texts, studying Sanskrit, relating to deities, that kind of stuff. It's moved into kind of a casual lineage for a bit in the process of conscious dying, and again, it's focused visualization and meditation and mantra and deity relation stuff. I'm finding there's a continual pattern. I'm about to go to the next one, which was another lineage, and then the next lineage, and I go, oh, overall, this is what's coming through is probably those core things, which is Mantrika Shakti. So the word and getting it alive, full of aliveness, and then relating that in the system polarities within myself and within life, and meditation, dharana, in the Hindu term for that, and then deity yoga, working with the divine aspects. And for many years I did a lot of my shamanic work with a teacher who was also in the same lineage of Kashmir Shaivism. So it was this blending of Western astrology with psychotherapeutic from primal and somatic experiencing and voice dialogue and family constellation and systems work with the tantric practices, right? And with Shiva Shakti, with deities, with mantras, and with empowerment, and so I love that synthesis, and it's what I've then done a lot of my offerings to groups and individuals is to work with what I call embodied astrology. And these days it continues with mantra and meditation, but I'm far more into channeling energy, and I've got all these healing tools that I work with people for, like you do. I've got emotional clearing for really focusing on the emotional body. I've got sort of what I'll call my shamanic clearing for extending that into more of the energetic and the astral to really get a bit stronger and deeper, and that gets a bit more into the past life stuff as well, and the kind of karmic inheritance we're bringing through ourselves, and also with connected in with genetically from our family and culturally. And then I've got karmic release statements, which is explicitly working on that karmic level, the real soul level, and how that's then manifesting through all the bodies. And then behind all of that for me is then channeling energy. So I wake up and I channel energy and I clear through things and I release, and it's a meditation. It's often involves mantras, and I'm channeling. So it's actually the synthesis. And I've never thought of myself as having the discipline or having the battlefield capacity or the yang to get out there. I've always been more like, ouch, it hurts, so I want to stop it hurting. But I thought of myself as having addictions. And so I guess these practices, I've sort of shaped them as habits and addictions in a positive sense. And I love them now. They're enriching and they're enlivening, and that means I've got an abundance of energy or Shakti to be able to channel for others and to connect. Deities, more like the air traffic controller, get the airplane of the deity to come down and pick up the person and take them for a ride. And it's a mind-blowing honor, to have these as my kind of practice. I've never actually answered that question, so it's really interesting to reflect on. Thanks for throwing it back to me.
Oh yeah, no, thank you, man. And yeah, tell us about your epic, man. I've also been Ben took me through, and I think it was twice through the Kali Durga clearing, and that was like, whew, that moves a lot of deep soul ties and stuff like that. So I think like anyone who wants to do the cleanup work on the soul thing, that's a good go-to. That's a definitely. And then anyway, there's a lot of great stuff that you said there. I could just really feel the life of it. I'm curious. This is just my personal interest, about your channeling. Like how can you just talk a little bit about the energetics of how you connect to channeling and what that looks like, for you? Because I think we're both fascinated in energy, and I think what we've learned about each other on this new meeting again is that we've grown so much again, which is beautiful, but also there's more deeper levels of resonance and subtlety and more dimensions of who we be that are seen, felt, probably would have already been there, but now they're actually more consciously integrated and present, which is really nice to experience that with you, brother. And yeah, so I'm really fascinated to the channeling, like how what does that look like for you, and how do you bring it through? And I think those who are listening will probably get a buzz from it as well. So yeah.
Well, in one sense, we're all transmitting, we're all channeling. We're transmitting our state. And I guess then for channeling energies, we're getting something that's beyond just our individual personal capacity to eat some food, generate some energy, work with some basic energies of life to build up our chi, and to be able to transmit. We're actually kind of plugging into something deeper and allowing it to flow through us, like you open up a window and let the sunshine and fresh air come in, right? And I would say I experienced channeling with your embodied I Ching when I experienced the channeling of the elemental energies. And it was so clean. I was like, oh, I'm not feeling Ryan's energy. I'm not feeling his chi and life force. I'm not feeling the result of his good meal and his daily practices, but I'm getting the result of what's being able to be.
Not that it's bad. Not that it's bad, but yeah, you don't want that. You want the,
yeah. I don't want it to be limited to that just one person. I would like to get, I'd like to get an ocean-sized hit of the
universal
water chi, or universal, and I really felt that. So that's that kind of channeling, and I started channeling energies as soon as my energetic system opened up as a teenager. I just didn't know what I was doing. And another way a lot of people might relate to it is it's very common these days to have a Reiki initiation. You get this attunement at the 7th chakra kind of level that allows you to start channeling a quality of universal chi out through your hands and, send it remotely or put it into certain body parts. Beautiful, and I end up being a master of that and can initiate other people. Not that I do, but it's for decades having my hands on my system, just channeling some chi in, has just been a beautiful, nourishing practice. And if you go from that and say, well, there's just a lot more things you can channel. You can then start to connect into, if you wake up and grow up your capacity to be present and open at certain dimensions of reality, then you can access the beings that are there, or the elements or the aspects of existence that are there, and you can channel. And channeling beings, I'm not going to go into that kettle of fish. It can get really weird really quick. That's a whole other conversation. But I prefer to head towards channeling deities, which are the sort of archetypal expression of the divine. So we're like only one step down from pure divinity. It's like it's taking a form, and it might be a channeling of love, or it might be a channeling of grounding, or it might be a channeling of abundance. You know, you might think of Lakshmi, or channeling of transformation, sort of golden shimmering transmutation, which I think of as Kali Durga from the Hindu system, or the Mahakala in the Tibetan Buddhist system. And there's cross-cultural references. And finally, there's then channeling sort of directly from the divine, or from the divine kind of substrate or web of existence. And that's something that's only opened up in the last few years for me, that I can be conscious about. And I'm like a kid in the candy store. I'm brand new again. It's amazing. So it's bringing a lot more grace into my life, into my nervous system, a lot more health, a lot more. I think it would be what's most responsible for then any of the shift of the growth and embodiment that you've seen in me just in this couple of years since we last really spoke. I would attribute it to this divine channeling. And yeah, it's now the foundation of everything I do with my clients. And yeah, and you've got to experience it, I guess, to know what it's about. But yeah, there's plenty of opportunities on my side, or maybe I'll give you a session one day and it'd be interesting to get your feedback, because if you've got any sensitivity to this stuff, you know, some people are like, oh, I can feel this is happening and that's happening, and
Yeah, definitely. Well, I love the growth that you've gone through. Like as soon as we reconnected, it was like, whoa, could feel like this is awesome. So it was yeah, and yeah, man, that's great about the path we're on, as we we get to move through levels and layers, and yeah, we get to energetically like support each other with the strengthening of what we're already holding too, because it's kind of like today's been a lot of I feel that like a lot of transmission of usually what's unspoken or not really clearly articulate. Like it's hard to it's a great mirror of someone who's got the resonance and the frameworks to link those back. And yeah, this has been one of the most beautiful and juicy, informative and relevant and resonating conversations I've had in a while, where it's coming up. And yeah, so I think I think
lovely, lovely chatting to you.
Yeah.
We're well over 2 hours. It's been rich. Obviously, we could go for days and hanging out, but we're recording this, and I'm feeling to share it if you're open to sharing it. And I guess then, if that's the context, the other bit I just want to finish on for anyone with practice is whatever practice works for you, whatever you can get access to, whatever vibes with you, whatever suits what's showing up as what you need to work on next in your growing up, cleaning up, showing up, sort of waking up journey. That's my takeaway. Any final comment for you, for anyone who's been willing to sit through and listen to us ramble on? And
I think just all in everyone's own divine timing. Like that's the big key is it'll just trust your own divine timing, and it's all like it is truly perfect, even though some days it gets a little bit intense and a little bit full on. At least it gets less intense in terms of the reactive and more divinely intense in terms of the intuitive and the intellectual and the willful action that we take. And so that's the key at the beginning. It's like, fuck, like, okay, it's like, how am I meant to get through this shit? And it's like, and then you make gains, and then you fucking, it's like, it feels like it's worse. You're like, what the hell? It feels like I'm just first in the dirt, and it's like, shit, like, you know what I mean? It's like that. And then, you have to be willing to get back up on the life, not be judgmental, be in expansive state, and try again and go for it again, and deepen and learn and be, and like truly it will initiate you into the qualities of the soul, which are more compassionate and loving and understanding. And yeah, so I the final things is, it's like I don't know, find your tribe, is the big piece. Find your tribe, and trust your journey, and
like, you know, it's you can go in and out, you know what I mean? You're not stuck anywhere. And in fact, it's like the advice I would give to someone is don't get stuck anywhere. You know, like just, you know what I mean? Like
Yep.
be fluid, be like water, my friend, as Bruce Lee would say, but be fluid and just allow the journey to unfold. And that way your scoping capacity will be much more richer. I love the fundamental piece too. Like, don't, you know, ironically, don't take any of this seriously. You know, it can get super heady, but it will strengthen the capacity of the full incarnation of the being into the soul, into the physical body. And that is more ecstatic because you're like talking about so much more of life being available. And I just find everything gets richer as a result of that. And money is such a it's a very important part depending on someone's values, but very small into the capacity of richness that can be felt in the other dimensions and levels, which then is like the backing of a far greater economy because it's truly backed by real wealth, not by I'm trying to meet something because my emotional needs or my egoic tendencies haven't been met on that personality level. Like we want that to die as soon as possible. You know what I mean? So if there's a message, I'd probably say, let that part die and come to full life in a way that is it's just is juicy. And there's plenty of there's plenty of great ways out there. So
and there's help from practitioners like yourself and myself if you need healing or you need training and transmissions, and make it as smooth as possible. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And also don't be afraid of the like, you know, that's what I would tell my old self is like, don't be afraid of the lightning and the flame, even it will burn you at some stage somewhere on the path. Learning the frameworks and getting the support will ensure you that you won't that we won't burn out. It won't stay like that so long. But if you have and you've been on the journey, just know that you're moving into, I would say, you're moving into OG territory. If I can put myself on, I don't want to put myself on some sort of territory, but I really feel like anyone who's been on the path, who's been burnt by the lightning or the flame, and you're moving through it, you're an OG, you're moving into the initiation of actually having true wisdom and love. And that's in many ways, it's kind of like the second to the third degree, the final moving through the emotional body part that's finally kind of got the better of us in a moment and frozen us into a certain time or space. Like if you can move through that and become more fluid and energetically alive, and work through those pains and unpack them, not to stay there too long. If you're there, work through it, whether it's mentally, emotionally, energetically, spiritually, calling on the more deeper aspects of support, whatever it is, unpack that and move through it. Those things are not, it's not, it might feel like it's forever, but the deep truth is everything's eternal and moving all the time. So like, give yourself to the life, give yourself to the current, move through that. And that's what everything we've been talking about allows people to experience more fluidity of that. And then, yeah, you'll find your transmission and you'll find your path. And the last thing I'll say is it's like, what is it? It's either a moment, a season, or a lifetime. You'll find certain practitioners will give you a transmission, might be just in a moment, or this conversation could be a part of it. You might decide that, wow, Chris or Ryan's got something that you want to journey for a season. And then in that case, dedicate yourself to that season and be pure to it. That would be my advice, And then some things we find, it's like, wow, I'm still doing this. I'm still on the, this thing is still present in my life. And and don't throw the baby out with the bathwater on the way. Transcend and include, as you're saying. And I think that's a good wrap and a good conclusion of at least some of the highlights, even though there was many that we spoke about. So yeah.
Brother, really, really rich. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, likewise, bro.